Life is buzzing in the streets of American metropolises. Lights shine brighter than stars. Skyscrapers reach for the clouds and the streets pulse with endless energy. But few know that a forbidden underworld is right beneath our feet. We will descend into the underground of US cities. Old bunkers, secret bars, and lost mansions hide beneath the glitz of Los Angeles. We'll uncover the intrigue-filled tunnels of Chicago and New York, once used by the mafia and gangsters. We'll step into the basement of Philadelphia's Masonic Temple, where something mysterious is happening. And finally, Washington will reveal the secrets of its underground structures beneath the Capitol and the White House. Each step into these places challenges our fears. Are you ready to dive in? The forbidden underworld of US cities. The City of Angels, La La Land, the entertainment capital of the world, the city that goes by so many names. It is the true embodiment of the American dream. Its greater metropolitan area is home to around 13 million people. More than 45 million tourists visit it annually, and hundreds of millions dream of conquering it. This is hardly surprising. After all, this is the place where Hollywood blockbusters and top music hits are born, where events like the Oscars and the Grammys are held annually, where you can encounter your favorite music artists and actors waiting in line for a latte, where you can immerse yourself in the culture of hundreds of countries just by walking through neighborhoods without ever leaving the US. But there is also something else here, a world hidden from eyes of millions. A world that's buzzing underneath the streets. A world where mysterious tunnels coexist with oil wells and forgotten bunkers. This world is an integral part of Los Angeles, a city that you have certainly never seen like this before. Today, we'll go through its underground layers and reveal their secrets. What lies beneath Los Angeles? Let's start with the surface right under our feet. The area of Los Angeles is 1,299 square kilometers, and that's just the principal city. But when talking about Los Angeles, people often mean the entire metropolitan area, known as Greater Los Angeles. We are now at level 0, right on the surface. The urban area covers 5,910 square kilometers. Various types of pavement, such as asphalt, concrete, and paving stones, account for about 40% of this area. The remaining 60% is open ground in parks and private properties. Beneath this surface lies another Los Angeles, a mysterious and fascinating underground world. And we're on our way to discover it. We have to struggle through the hard pavement layer to reach a depth of 10 centimeters, 4 inches. Below it are several layers of base materials. This is usually gravel or crushed stone. The thickness of this layer is typically between 15 and 30 centimeters, that's 6 to 12 inches. It serves for drainage and even distribution of the load from moving vehicles. Okay, this goes for the areas where the city is covered with the hard pavement shell. But what will we find in these shallow depths in city parks? If you start digging a hole in different regions of the US, you will see a completely different cross-section picture. Look right here. And in Los Angeles, we'll see something like this. This top layer is called the organic or humus horizon. This layer contains decayed plant matter, leaves, roots, and other nutrient-rich organics. It teems with life, ants, centipedes, earthworms, various beetles, their eggs and larvae, as well as microorganisms. In the urban part of the city, at a depth of 30 centimeters, around 12 inches, we'll see various types of utilities. The safest are laid highest. Internet and telephone cables usually at a depth of 30 to 90 centimeters. Gas pipelines are laid a bit deeper, from 45 to 120 centimeters, depending on specific requirements and local safety regulations. Electric cables usually run at depths from 60 to 120 centimeters, that's 2 to 4 feet, which ensures protection from damage. Here, the safety of both the cables and the people is at stake. Water supply and sewerage pipelines are laid at 120 to 240 centimeters, that's up to 8 feet. Such depth protects against mechanical damage and temperature deformation. All this forms a dense network that binds the city up to a depth of around 2.5 meters, 8 feet. This is why you can see signs like these within the city. Or like these. It would be a bad idea to dig in such places. All these utilities are laid for a purpose. They connect private homes and administrative buildings to the city infrastructure. Most houses have both above-ground and underground parts. The foundations of private homes in Los Angeles are laid at various depths along with utilities. For small residential houses of 1 or 2 stories, shallow foundations are usually laid at a depth of 45 to 60 centimeters, that's 18 to 24 inches, suitable for flat areas with stable soils. Larger houses or areas with less stable soils require depths of 60 to 120 centimeters. Due to the region's seismic activity, foundations are sometimes deepened to 1.5 meters or more for added stability and safety. At this same level, we can find basements. In the southern US, basements are less commonly built in private homes than in the north, but they exist. Shallow basements are at depths of 1.5 to 2.5 meters, that's 5 to 8 feet, while proper basements are at depths of 2.5 to 3 meters from the ground level. That's not all. There is much more hidden beneath Los Angeles. If we can't dig thoroughly, how can we see what's happening under Los Angeles? Now let's imagine that we descended underground to the level of utilities and acquired a superpower to move quickly through the earth. Moreover, we can pass through the soil and everything else, not burrow like a mole. It's pretty cool, right? Let's continue our journey through underground Los Angeles. As we descend past several dusty dark basements to reach a depth of 4.5 meters, it's 15 feet underground, we'll find ourselves in a huge hall filled with cars. This is the vault of the Peterson Automotive Museum. Over 100 rare car models created over the 120-year history of automobile manufacturing are stored right here. And this is only what couldn't fit upstairs in the museum's 25 galleries. Just look at these cars. The museum's founders, husband and wife, Robert and Margie Peterson, were passionate car enthusiasts and turned their hobby into this epic exhibit. This isn't to mention their other remarkable achievements in publishing and collecting. We're diving right into the gleaming, polished floor of this vault, descending even deeper. But we don't have to go down for long. At a depth of 3 to 4 meters, 13 feet and onwards, we find ourselves in yet another strange room. And it will sharply differ from the luxury shine of the Peterson Vault. We find ourselves in some dark tunnels. There is an atmosphere of abandonment here. Our tunnel intersects with others, but the scene is the same everywhere. Dirt, old graffiti and crumbling brickwork. What are these abandoned catacombs and why are they here? They present such a stark contrast to the bustling urban life above. Here, you can also see some old rails. It seems like nothing has run on them for a very long time though. Now things become a bit clearer. These tunnels under Los Angeles were once operational railways that belonged to 2 separate lines. The Pacific Electric red car and the Los Angeles Railway yellow car. They were used from the late 19th century until the 1960s. The entire underground complex still vaguely resembles a set of railway stations, but decades of abandonment have left their mark, making these places quite grim. And it's even more intriguing to delve into the history of these tunnels. During the Prohibition period from 1920 to 1933, an underground and dark life thrived here in every sense of the word. While the world above endured enforced sobriety, these tunnels were actively used for bootleggers to transport illegal alcohol, and there was also illegal bars operating underground. Rumor has it that over the decades, these tunnels were used by the police to transport prisoners by the mafia, to dispose of bodies by the banks, to move cash, and much more. Quite a place, huh? This is not just some underground dungeon. It's an impressive network of tunnels, about 17 kilometers, 10 miles long. For bootleggers and regular patrons of drinking establishments, there was plenty of space here to hide, store, transport, and even produce alcohol on an industrial scale. The above-ground establishments were cleverly disguised. For example, the townhouse in Venice. Here, customers slipped through a concealed door on the floor and entered a room that could hold no more than 2 people at a time. Or the King Eddie Bar, founded in 1906. During Prohibition from 1920 to 1933, it opened as a piano store. Yet its basement continued to operate as a bar. Rumour has it that it was directly connected to this very underground tunnel system. Such establishments adopted the name Speakeasy, and some of them have become historical landmarks of Los Angeles. Nowadays, it's not easy to access these tunnels legally. This is primarily due to safety concerns, as part of the brick archways regularly fall off. However, sometimes enthusiasts manage to do it. In some places in the city, you can even descend to the tunnel level by elevator or escalator. But let's continue our journey. We are passing by the city utilities and a bunch of other things, and suddenly it seems we've ended up in someone's basement again. But there's something unusual here. There's almost none of the usual everything but the kitchen sink stuff people typically store in basements. Instead, we see a room clearly set up for the long-term stay of several people. Bunks, sleeping bags, hygiene supplies, as well as canned food, medicines, and even collections of magazines. Someone clearly intended to survive a zombie apocalypse here. This is a shelter that came as a bonus to people who bought a house in Los Angeles in the San Fernando Valley area. The thing is, the previous owners equipped it back in the mid-20th century when the threat of nuclear war was not just plausible, but very real. And nothing has changed there since then. The shelter has turned into a real-time capsule. It should be noted that this is not a bomb shelter, but specifically a fallout shelter. Although it's located several meters underground, it would not have withstood a close nuclear explosion. Such shelters were built during the Cold War, when the threat of nuclear war between the United States and the Soviet Union caused serious concern. Looking at this place, one can't help but wonder, how many more such shelters are there in Los Angeles? We can answer. Thousands. Under many administrative buildings, under McDonald's restaurants, under schools, under churches. Many bunkers were kept strictly secret, their existence becoming known only many years later when some were opened to the public. Of course, not all of them are such time capsules. Many of them are probably just used as basement spaces now. But you could quite possibly find among them shelters like that, like this one, are filled with essentials from the Cuban Missile Crisis era. On the official Los Angeles government website, lacity.gov, you can download the following document. The appendix lists the addresses of 2,900 public shelters in Los Angeles, and this is just a fraction. You can find the full list in the catalogue of the Los Angeles Central Library. If you've been to the USA, or even more so, if you live there, you have probably seen these signs. You most probably didn't pay attention to them. By the way, these are not only public shelters. We started this story with a private one, so are there probably more? Most likely, yes. Someone once asked on Quora, are there any private bunkers in Los Angeles, California that can be rented or hired out as fallout shelters during an emergency? The retired police officer and military person comprehensively answered this question. The word private should give you a clue. People who have private bunkers generally don't advertise them because when it's time to head to the bunker, they don't want a crowd of people heading to the same place. One can only guess how many such shelters are hidden beneath Los Angeles, whose very existence the owners prefer to keep secret. Shall we go deeper? Descending another several feet, we find ourselves in yet another tunnel. Well, that's hardly surprising. But here, there's no mistaking about what kind of tunnel it is and purpose. The sound of water below already gives us a hint, and the smell. The smell leaves no doubts. We're in a sewer located at a depth of 6 to 9 meters, 20 to 30 feet. The Los Angeles sewer system is impressive in its scale and engineering complexity. It is one of the largest and oldest ones in the US. Just think about this. The LA sewer system includes about 27,359 kilometers of pipes of various diameters. If laid end to end, this chain would stretch over nearly 2/3 of the Earth's equator. The thinnest local sewer pipes run from each house to a local collection site, which usually looks like an underground well, accessible through a manhole. Indeed, those manholes we see in the streets lead to such wells. When enough wastewater accumulates in the underground well, it flows into the next larger pipe. The main collectors, which carry most of the wastewater, lie at depths of 3 to 9 meters, 10 to 30 feet. This is the kind of collector we've just flown into. What else can you see here besides sewage? Quite a lot. You might encounter not only utility workers, but also tourists. Yes, indeed, some thrill seekers will go even that far as to conduct tours of this pungent corner. We might even see drones on our way. They've been used by technical services for a long time to monitor the condition of collectors and pipes. And of course, this place teems with life. Countless bacteria, fungi, mold, and larger life forms, like insects and even rats. The scene of a rat coming up from the sewer into your toilet is worthy of a horror movie. Unfortunately, these cases do happen, though they are extremely rare. Especially considering that Los Angeles ranks a threatening second place in the US for rat infestations right after Chicago. Anyway, it's a place where you wouldn't want to linger for long. Delving a few feet towards Hawthorne, we're flying into another tunnel. Will we ever get out of this sewer? But this place, it's far too clean for a sewer, and it's clearly built very recently. There are tracks below, but this can't be a subway. Here, the depth is about 10 meters, 30 feet, while most of the subway is deeper. Besides, the place doesn't look like a subway at all. Well, what is it then? The internal diameter is about 4 meters, 13 feet, or to be precise, 4.2 meters. The tunnel is straight and even stretching for 1.83 kilometers, 1.14 miles. There's nothing to speculate on further. However, the tunnel is suspiciously close to the headquarters of Elon Musk's SpaceX company. This is clearly not a coincidence. And finally, everything starts to make sense. This is the very same boring test tunnel built by Musk's The Boring Company in 2018. It was an epic construction project that started in 2016. The tunnel was built by a machine developed by the Boring Company. And here the ambitious Musk decided to set another record. When construction started, he spoke at TED and explained that even a snail moves on average 14 times faster than a typical tunneling machine. His plan was to improve the machines to the point where they would move at least faster than a snail. At the tunnel opening party, Musk brought along his pet, a snail named Gary. This was already the 6th snail, as they don't live very long, but it surely served as an inspiration for Musk's next bright ideas. One cannot say that he managed to outpace the snail, since the construction of the less than 2-kilometer long tunnel took about 2 years. Nevertheless, the construction process provided many useful insights and, in general, the efforts were not in vain. Moreover, thanks to it, another Boring Company tunnel operates under Las Vegas. The tunnel under Los Angeles was built as a test bed to try out the Boring Company's idea on innovative public transportation, including Hyperloop. These ideas were later realized in the Las Vegas Convention Center Loop. Let's dive into the depths of underground Los Angeles and go southward, gradually descending a few more feet through the familiar landscape of pipes, wells, building foundations. Here, at a considerable depth of 10 to 15 meters, 33 to 50 feet, we find ourselves amid dazzlingly luxurious quarters. Yep, we're in an underground private house. It has a chic banquet hall, a luxurious sauna and spa, and even a well-equipped tennis court. Additionally, there's a ballroom with marble columns and crystal chandeliers. Next to this classic luxury is a state-of-the-art movie theater with all the high-tech attributes. All these rooms, designed for various purposes, are located on several underground floors. What is this place anyway? We are at Hacienda de la Paz, a luxurious mansion located in rolling hills. Its standout feature isn't just its incredible opulence, but the fact that this luxury extends to extensive underground levels. The total area of the underground spaces is several thousand square feet, comparable to the area of the house above ground. This magnificence extends downward over 5 floors, reaching a total depth of 15 meters, 50 feet. Why build all this luxury underground rather than above? The reason is that only single-story buildings are allowed in this area. Indeed, the surface level complies with all regulations. There is only 1 floor, but these rules say nothing about building underground. And thus, Hacienda de la Paz emerged. Not just a house, but a true underground palace, astonishing and delighting us with its scale and sophistication. Let's go on, shall we? We are going to the lowest floor and diving even deeper. What awaits us at a depth of 20 to 30 meters, 65 to 100 feet? Don't forget that Los Angeles is, after all, a metropolis with towering skyscrapers. And they too have foundations. These are massive monolithic engineering structures made of concrete and steel that are absolutely needed to support giant buildings. Several types of foundations are used for skyscrapers, mainly pile and mat foundations. Piles can reach from 20 to 60 meters, 65 to 197 feet deep, or even more depending on geological conditions and structural requirements. In the seismically risky environment of Los Angeles, high-rise buildings mostly have even more reliable monolithic concrete foundations. For example, the Wilshire Grand Center, the tallest skyscraper in Los Angeles, uses a so-called mat foundation. This is a solid concrete slab, 5.5 meters thick, that supports the entire building, distributing the load over a large area. The main steel columns that support the skyscraper's frame are embedded within this massive slab. The construction of this foundation involved one of the largest continuous concrete pours in US history. In seismically active areas like Los Angeles, skyscraper foundations also include special seismic isolators that help reduce the impact of earthquakes. Seismic isolators are typically made of rubber and steel. They are installed between the building's foundation and its above-ground structure, creating a flexible layer that absorbs tremors. These massive engineering structures are what we'll continually see if we fly below the surface in the downtown area. And of course, skyscrapers have their own basements, though this is a massive understatement as the lower levels of large buildings often extend several floors underground. It's hard to just call them basements, considering their size. For example, both skyscrapers in the California Plaza complex on Bunker Hill in downtown Los Angeles have some of the deepest underground parking and infrastructure in the city, which is at least 5 floors deep. But perhaps the deepest underground levels belong to the Wilshire Grand Center, one of the tallest skyscrapers in Los Angeles. The skyscraper has 6 underground floors that include parking and technical facilities. They go approximately 27 meters, 90 feet deep. That's actually very deep, and even deeper than most of the tunnels and subway stations in Los Angeles. By the way, what about the city's subway? How deep does it go? And what's it like? Well, it seems like we've already reached the deepest part of the subway level. The deepest subway station in Los Angeles is Bunker Hill Station. It is located at a depth of about 30 meters, 100 feet. This station serves downtown LA and is an important hub for passengers traveling throughout the city. At what depths do the other subway lines run? It depends on the specific section. Some tunnels are only a few feet underground, while others reach 10 meters, 33 feet down, or even deeper. If we wanted to explore the total length of the Los Angeles subway tunnels, that would be quite a task. The entire network stretches over 170 kilometers. And if anyone tells you ghost stories about workers lost in the tunnel maze 100 years ago, we're afraid we have to disappoint you. The Los Angeles subway is relatively new. It began operation only as late as 1993. This is literally yesterday compared to the New York subway, and even more so the London Underground, which we talked about in previous videos. This is likely because most local residents have their own cars, so authorities focused on building new highways rather than new public transportation systems. Well, what other interesting things can we find if we go deeper and deeper under Los Angeles? Is there anything else at all? Let's take a look and find out. Going deeper, we'll often encounter water columns. What are these? These are private and industrial wells that draw water from deep aquifers up to 90 meters, 295 feet deep. This is how they look if you see them directly from the ground mass. And there are quite a few of them in the city. What's next? The deeper we go, the more monotonous the landscape becomes. At a depth of 100 meters, 330 feet, we see only sand, rocks, and occasionally pockets of deep water deposits. And then a city legend of Los Angeles comes to mind, one that has never been taken seriously. But now, being at such a depth, we might encounter underground reptilians. Hold on, don't switch off just yet. Let us explain. Los Angeles has always been known for its cultural and ethnic diversity, but in 1934 the city outdid itself. There started rumors about the existence of an ancient civilization of people who worshipped lizards and also looked somewhat reptilian. These rumors didn't come out of nowhere. They are said to have roots in the legends of the Hopi tribe. However, the legends spoke not of lizard people, but of ant people. The legend says that they led the tribe to underground shelters, providing refuge and food until the surface world became habitable again. In the 1930s, all of this caught the interest of G. Warren Shufelt, an amateur engineer and adventurer. He claimed to have found evidence of these underground cities. Using his bizarre invention, which was essentially just an X-ray device, he allegedly discovered previously unknown tunnels beneath Los Angeles, stretching from the Central Park Library to Chavez Ravine, where there is now the Dodger Stadium. After his alleged discovery, Shufelt reached out to a chief named Greenleaf from the Hopi tribe in Arizona. The chief confirmed the legends of the lizard people who built underground cities to escape a great disaster. A giant tongue of fire that destroyed everything in its path. These cities were dug with the help of some chemical substances, and the tunnels provided ventilation thanks to the tides. Having this knowledge, Shufelt began excavations on Fort Moore Hill in downtown Los Angeles. He even managed to get permission from the city authorities and drilled nearly 100 meters, 330 feet underground, hoping to find tunnels. However, instead of tunnels and underground chambers, he found only dirt and water. The site quickly flooded with groundwater and the search had to be stopped. Shufelt was never able to prove the existence of the underground city. Despite Shufelt's failure, the legend of the lizard people continues to live in the city's mythology. Even without real evidence, this story has become part of Los Angeles' cultural heritage. some still believe in the existence of lizard people and continue to search for their traces in other places, such as around Mount Shasta in Northern California. So if you had the real and not imaginary chance to find out whether lizard people lived under Los Angeles, would you investigate? Comment down below. Whatever the case, this is just 100 meters, 330 feet deep. It's riveting to see what lies even deeper. We're going a few hundred feet down. Here's what we encounter, something black and viscous like tar. Hold on, actually it is tar, but it quickly becomes clear that in this case the tar just lines the inside of some reservoir filled with something black and oily. It's oil, a whole lake of oil under Los Angeles. Yes, the city lies directly on a large oil field. It's located north of downtown Los Angeles. Long and narrow, it stretches directly south of Dodger Stadium and continues westward to Vermont Avenue, covering an area that is about 6 kilometers, 4 miles long. The oil in the Los Angeles City oil field is relatively close to the surface. That's why we reached it so quickly. The field has 3 separate productive horizons, or vertical zones, which are sequentially numbered as the first, second, and third zones. The average depth of these 3 zones from top to bottom is approximately 900, 1,100, and 1,500 feet, 457 meters. Those who have never been to Los Angeles might immediately ask, does this mean oil is extracted right in the city? Are there oil rigs right in the streets? You'd be surprised, but yes, the history of oil extraction in Los Angeles is deep, dramatic, and sometimes surprising. Tar has been seeping to the surface in these areas since prehistoric times. The Native American population used it for waterproofing and other purposes. They didn't know about oil and its value then, but once its value was recognized, that's when the real story began. The earliest known well in the field, called the Dryden Well, was essentially a relatively shallow, hand-dug pit near the intersection of 3rd Street and Colorado Street in 1857. In 1890 to 1892, several prospectors made more determined efforts to establish new wells. The most successful was Edward Doheny and Cannon's Well. Doheny figured out how to use a pointed eucalyptus log as an improvised impact hammer to deepen the well. At that time, there were no regulations in California regarding the distance between wells. Therefore, anyone with $1,000 to $1,500 to spend on drilling an oil well could potentially become rich. By the way, the most successful entrepreneur in this area was a piano teacher from Kentucky named Emma Summers. She initially bought a half share in a well near the modern Civic Center for $700 and then acquired several more on credit. She reinvested the income from oil into more and more wells. Local power companies, hotels, and utilities bought her oil. When the price of oil peaked at around $1.80 per barrel, Emma managed about half the wells in the central part of the field. This earned her the nickname Oil Queen of California. Remarkably, even while being an oil magnate and managing complex accounting, Emma continued to give piano lessons in the evenings. As the oil boom waned, Summers' fortune dwindled. By 1915, the peak years of her oil business had ended, and she largely withdrew from her once prominent business life. Overall, more than 9 billion barrels of oil have been extracted from the time of the oil fever to present day. The peak production in the entire Los Angeles basin from all the fields took place in the 1930s. At that time, approximately 137 million barrels of oil were produced annually. This is equivalent to about 375,000 barrels of oil per day. So how is oil extraction in these areas doing now? Let's take a look at this map. Can you guess what each of these dots represents? And if you zoom in, it looks even more impressive. Indeed, each dot represents an oil well. But how come? Right in the city? Yep, exactly. Here's what it looks like on the surface. This has already become an issue for the city. In 2022, LA authorities began tentative discussions toward banning oil extraction in the city. The City Council approved a resolution to ban all new oil and gas wells and phase out existing ones within the next 20 years. This historic decision came after many years of residents complaining that pollution from nearby wells affected their health. Currently, it's prohibited to establish new oil rigs and gas wells in Los Angeles. The old ones remain for now. Alright, so what lies below this oil lake under Los Angeles? Let's imagine that we've reached the bottom of the lake and are now going deeper and deeper. Finally, we would find ourselves at a point where the drilling of the deepest oil well in Los Angeles stopped. The depth is 2,300 meters, about 7,500 feet. But there is no oil here. It all remained much higher. Drilling stopped because beyond this point there would be nothing but sand and rocks. New York is a fantastic city, famous for its skyscrapers. But did you know this huge metropolis is more than just a noisy, dynamic, and vibrant city of opportunities? It's a city of mysteries and secrets with a whole underground world hidden underneath. To get a good look at everything, let's take a tour of underground New York. You'll look at millions of wires and hundreds of thousands of cables, see the sewer system and the water supply system, each 3 times the length of the Hudson River. But there is much more to it. What secret passages are there, and who lives in this underworld? Beneath New York lies a vast infrastructure of archaeological wonders. We'll start our behind-the-scenes tour with the layers closest to the surface. Grab your flashlights, we're about to start a fascinating journey called What Lies Under New York? In fact, there is also an entire city under New York streets, but most residents of the upper city don't think about it until something extraordinary happens. Let's cut through this endless layered cake as deep as the Chrysler Building and explore it inch by inch. At the very top there is an 8 centimeter, 3-inch layer of asphalt, which is followed by almost 25 centimeters, 10 inches of rough concrete. Beneath that lies the layer of soil. Through another 2.5 to 8 centimeters, 0.8 to 3 inches, there are wires, telephone and electrical, street lighting and fire alarms, as well as cable television. Further down, by about 30 centimeters, roughly a foot, one can find gas pipelines. Deeper still, at a depth of 1.2 meters, about 4 feet, runs the water supply. Here, let's take a closer look at one of the water sources. In the early 19th century, New York relied on well water, which quickly became polluted. Manhattan Island had the most limited sources of potable water, and some of it had to be transported from Brooklyn by boat. The issue was resolved by constructing a long underground aqueduct, a water pipeline designed to supply water to densely populated areas. The old Croton Aqueduct spans 66 kilometers, 41 miles, and is now the longest abandoned tunnel in New York. Built between 1837 and 1842, the old Croton Aqueduct is a brick-lined tunnel that begins at the Croton Dam, 41 miles north of New York City. It descended into the city through the Bronx and into Manhattan, where it ended at a reservoir located between 42nd and 40th Streets, from 5th to 6th Avenues. However, as water demand grew, it was decided to build a new aqueduct. The new Croton Aqueduct originally complemented the old Croton Aqueduct and was built roughly parallel to it. It opened in 1890, while the old one remained in service until 1955. Today, the northern end of the old aqueduct supplies water to Ossining, while a large section running through the Bronx is completely abandoned. And the sealed Manhattan section, as far as local enthusiasts know, hasn't been inspected since 2008. Let's go back from our tour of the aqueducts to the other layers of the underground New York. The water pipes are followed by steam pipes located 1.8 meters, 6 feet underground. Interestingly, these pipes are covered with harmful asbestos, a material widely used in the 20th century for construction, including pipe insulation. However, it was later discovered that asbestos poses significant health risks, causing respiratory diseases and even cancer. As a result, the use of asbestos for insulation has been phased out, but of the 166 kilometers, 103 miles of steam lines across 96th Street in Manhattan, approximately 90% are still coated in carcinogenic fiber. Another concern is that replacing them all at once could release even more asbestos into the air. Therefore, asbestos pipes are currently replaced only after accidents or as part of maintenance. Beneath New York City lies not just a physical network, but also a latent health hazard to its residents. Yet deeper still lies an even more unexpected structure. These are also pipes, but they look kind of weird. Neither water nor sewage flows through them, nor are they used for cables. What are they for? The answer will surprise many. They were once used for mail services. Let's now shift our focus to them. This is a pneumatic mill which is also located only 1.8 meters, 6 feet underground. Is this your first time hearing about it? Nonetheless, it actually functioned for quite a while. And not just anywhere, but near New York. Pneumatic mail emerged as an integral part of urban infrastructure in the mid-19th century in London, then in Manchester and other British cities, followed by Paris. In the USA, it first appeared in Philadelphia in 1893 and then reached New York in 1897. What did it look like? Imagine 43 kilometers, 27 miles of pipes buried 1.2 to 1.8 meters, 4 to 6 feet beneath the city streets, connecting 23 post offices. Capsule containers with letters, that is, steel cylinders weighing 11 kilos, 25 pounds each, and 53 or 61 centimeters, that's 21 or 24 inches long, zipped through them at a speed of 56 kilometers an hour, 35 miles per hour. Their diameter was 18 or 20 centimeters at 7 or 8 inches respectively. The compressor pumped air into the pipe which pushed the capsules to their destination. They were marked on the outside with their final destination, but they all had to pop up at each station along the way. If the capsule was meant for another station, it was sent back into the tube to continue its journey. Each capsule could contain up to 600 letters. At its peak, the system delivered 95,000 letters a day, accounting for 30% of all the city mail. What were the benefits? Mail arrived at any time, in any weather, regardless of the regular traffic. It seemed so promising that there were even dreams of once equipping every apartment with pneumatic mail. At the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries, there were even proposals to extend pneumatic mail pipes across the Atlantic, connecting America and Europe. The system's operators were known as rocketeers. One Postal Service veteran recalls that the containers popped out of the pipes about once a minute and were slightly warm and lubricated. But it is worth noting that not all letters were sent this way. First of all, first-class correspondence travelled underground. Regular letters were sent the old-fashioned way, by horse-drawn wagon. By the way, the system was created not by government authorities but by private companies which were paid rent by the city. Installing pneumatic mail pipes wasn't an easy task, as existing sewage and gas pipes limited the size and thus the volume and type of mail that could be transported underground. Additionally, the level of groundwater posed another challenge. The Miracle Post Office ceased operations in 1953, but not for the reasons you might expect. Firstly, the cost of renting the pipes turned out to be exorbitant. Secondly, cars appeared and quickly ceased to be a curiosity. At the same time, although cars were generally slower than capsules, they could carry more letters and were cheaper to operate. Thirdly, any relocation of a post office meant that the pavement had to be opened up and the pipes relayed. Would you like to send a letter this way? You must admit, that's at least unusual. Share your thoughts in the comments. Now let's delve deeper. Below us lie the most unusual tunnels, which according to various sources were located 1.5 to 6 meters, that's 5 to 20 feet underground. In the 19th century, the western part of Manhattan, around 35th Street, was known for its slaughterhouses. As the city's population grew and cars became more and more prevalent, the movement of cattle through the streets began to cause significant traffic problems. According to legend, people solved this problem by building underground cattle tunnels under 12th Avenue, now known as the West Side Highway and 34th Street. However, the exact locations and construction materials of these tunnels have long been a topic of debate and speculation. In 2004, an archaeological report shed light on the legendary cattle tunnels at 34th and 38th Streets, used by West Side slaughterhouses. An official document from 1932 confirmed the existence of a 61-metre, that's 200 feet, cattle passage. Even earlier, in 1975, the New York Times also mentioned a similar tunnel. Today, the only cows you'll find in Manhattan are all art pieces. Next, we'll explore another tunnel which certainly exists without any doubt. It lies at only 5 metres, 17 feet underground. First, let's delve into some historical context. It's widely known that the world's first subway system was launched in London in 1863. But did you know that New York might have a legitimate claim to this title? The Brooklyn Historic Railway Association states that the world's first underground subway tunnel was constructed in 1844, stretching beneath Atlantic Avenue from Boron Place to Columbia Street. Initially, this wasn't an underground construction. The railway track was initially established as an open passageway and put into operation on December 3, 1844. 5 years after its opening, a ceiling was added to the passage, turning it into a tunnel. This structure measured 5.2 metres at 17 feet in height, extended 767 metres, 2,517 feet in length, and was 6.4 metres, that's 21 feet wide. Historically, it became the oldest underground subway tunnel in the world and earned a place in the Guinness Book of Records. Built nearly 40 years before the opening of the Brooklyn Bridge, this subway was the final step towards connecting Boston with New York City by continuous rail service. The project satisfied both investors who aimed to develop the region and residents who wished to preserve its beauty. However, a significant issue soon emerged. Sparks and clouds of smoke shot out of the ventilation shafts onto the avenue above. In 1859, after residents' numerous complaints, a New York court banned coal and wood-burning locomotives from entering Brooklyn. Thus, this New York subway was discontinued, failing to reach even 20 years of operation. But the tunnel continued to captivate the minds of New Yorkers. It was rumoured that Prohibition-era bootleggers, World War II spies, gangster and giant water rats found refuge within its walls. The tunnel remained shrouded in fascinating legends. Everything changed in 1980 when Bob Diamond, a 20-year-old engineering student passionate about trains, discovered a manhole at Atlantic Avenue and Court Street. He ventured to crawl 21 metres, 70 feet underground through a buried section of the tunnel, less than 0.6 metres, that's less than 2 feet high, and found a wall covering the main part of the tunnel. Then, with the help of an engineering crew from Brooklyn Union Gas Company, he broke through a massive concrete partition. So the tunnel found a second life. The discovery was followed by 8 months of persistent research and digging through city records. But more than a tunnel, Diamond was interested in an abandoned 1830s steam locomotive, which he believed was sealed behind the far wall. City officials reacted positively to his idea of establishing a museum within the tunnel. In 1982, Diamond started guiding public tunnel tours and founded the Brooklyn Historic Railway Association the same year. By the 21st century, the area above the tunnel had changed significantly from when Diamond made his discovery. And it was shocking when city officials closed his business in 2010 due to safety concerns. Diamond's disappointment is easy to understand, mainly because the popularity of the tunnel tour has only increased over 30 years. Hundreds of curious visitors pass through the manhole in the middle of Atlantic Avenue every week. Rooftop Films hosted screenings in the tunnel, launching series such as Trapped in the Tunnel and Tunnel of Love. National Geographic planned to make a documentary about this place. The research inside the tunnel suggested that a large metal object, possibly the rumoured locomotive, might be behind the far wall. However, this growing interest resulted in suspending the tours following recommendations from the fire department and the City of New York banning Diamond from the tunnel. However, for a long time, the man did not lose hope of returning inside one day. Today, its entrance from Atlantic Avenue remains sealed. In 2014, the owners of the Chemois restaurant at 135 Atlantic discovered the outside of the tunnel behind the basement wall during renovations and after a good whack with a sledgehammer. This space became part of the Le Boudoir Bar, intriguing customers with this part of Brooklyn history, a fitting tribute considering illegal whiskey producers were rumoured to hide in the tunnel. By the way, speaking about illegal activities, a little lower, just 6 meters, 20 feet underground, there are tunnels where real bloody massacres occurred. Doyer Street in New York's Chinatown is a small historical street that spans only 60 meters, 200 feet. Today it is home to some of New York's favorite shops and restaurants. The street was once known as the Bloody Angle due to its violent history in the 19th century. The fact is that the curvilinear Doyer Street allowed the bandits to sneak up on each other unnoticed. Having completed their bloody business, the criminals presumably fled into the network of tunnels under Chinatown. Let's take a look at one of them. For reference, locate the Apotheke Bar. The entrance to the tunnel is next to it. It leads to Chatham Square. Now let's travel back in time to 1909 within this tunnel. Look! Actor Ah Hoon is being escorted from the Chinese theatre that used to be at 57 Doyer Street. He's repeatedly mocked a rival gang in his speeches, understanding that his days were numbered. He made it safely through the tunnel to his apartment but was shot at night on the landing. Indeed, this block was once rocked by the Tongang War, the fierce conflict between Chinese factions in Chinatown. Some authors believe that the violence eventually subsided due to the Great Depression, the economic crisis of 1929 to 1939. Yet it is rumoured that Bloody Corner witnessed more violent deaths than any other intersection in America. Are you spooked already? Let's shift our focus from the tunnel to a ship. And no, we're not going to the surface. Rest assured there's no risk of seasickness here. This ship was discovered underground, 6 to 9 meters, 20 to 30 feet below the surface. In 2010, an astonishing discovery was made in Lower Manhattan, New York. Deep beneath the World Trade Center site, archaeologists unearthed the remains of a wooden ship. What was it doing there? Keep watching and find out. According to the new research, the ship was built from wood harvested from old forests in southeastern Pennsylvania around 1773. Remarkably, Independence Hall and other Revolutionary-era buildings in Philadelphia were built from wood harvested around the same time and in the same area, according to Edward Cook, a tree ring researcher at Columbia University in New York. The vessel, a sailing ship known as a sloop, was likely constructed in a small Philadelphia shipyard soon after the timber was harvested. It's believed that after being in use for about 20 years, the ship travelled to Lower Manhattan where it sunk, either intentionally or accidentally. It ended up buried under debris and other materials used to expand Manhattan's shoreline. How did scientists find out the date of the ship construction? Cook and his team analysed the growth rings of white oak planks used in the ship's frame. The youngest ring, formed in the year the timber was felled, dates back to 1773. The same year the Bostonians held their famous Tea Party. Cook and his colleagues suggested that the ship was built at a small shipyard in Philadelphia since the wood had the same sequence of growth rings. Large shipyards obtained wood from different places with different growing conditions, resulting in less uniform ring patterns. The area in Lower Manhattan where the ship was found was filled in during the 1790s, so it likely served its owner no more than 10 or 20 years. It is also believed that the wood could have been infected with shipworms, which shortened its service life. Can we still find the ship at the same place? No, because it was taken to the Maryland Archaeological Conservation Laboratory. Perhaps one day the sailboat will end up in a New York museum. But for now, let's leave the underground Manhattan for a while and move to Brooklyn, where we go even deeper to discover a real cheese kingdom. We bet you associate underground New York with anything but cheese. But things are much more interesting than you think. For many years, thousands of pounds of delicious cheese ripened right beneath Brooklyn. In 1849, a brewery opened at the intersection of Bergen Street and Franklin Avenue. In 1866, the owners built an ice house and a tunnel connecting it to the brewery, although this place has a whole network of tunnels. Until May 2022, this brewery building was home to Crown Finish Caves, a cheese aging company. They used these subterranean spaces to mature their fragrant dairy products. The company's cellars maintained a constant temperature of 10 degrees Celsius, 50 degrees Fahrenheit, the same coolness as it was over a century and a half ago when the Nassau Brewery operated there. The owner once offered cave tours and even hosted concerts. If you ventured 9.1 meters, 30 feet underground, you would have found nearly 11,800 kilograms, that's 26,000 pounds, of cheese at various stages of aging on the shelves. However, the company was closed in 2022. Who knows what will happen in these basements in the future? Unfortunately, currently there's nothing here. So let's leave this place for now and go back to Manhattan, where the tunnels of Columbia University await us at a depth of 15 meters, 50 feet. They predate the campus itself. Before Columbia University, between West 116th and 120th Streets, there was the Bloomingdale Insane Asylum, one of the first mental health institutions in the country. The tunnel system underneath was reportedly used by staff to move patients between buildings. When Columbia University acquired the property in the 1890s, it demolished most of the asylum except for the administrative offices and tunnels. As the university expanded over the years, so too did the tunnels, which were repurposed to provide heating and cooling to new buildings. By the early 20th century, these tunnels connected almost the entire campus and became popular passageways. During the Manhattan Project, that is, the US program to develop nuclear weapons from 1942 to 1946, the tunnels were utilized by Columbia scientists to transport radioactive materials between buildings. They were also used to transport supplies during student protests. Over the decades, student interest in the tunnels had increased dramatically. The game of Capture the Flag, where teams had to capture the enemy's flag, became a craze in the early 2000s and spread to the tunnels. Today, the oldest section of the tunnels has been filled in. The introduction of magnetic locks in the mid-2000s has also significantly restricted student access. In 2008, the cyclotron in Pupin's basement, a key device in the Manhattan Project, was dismantled, symbolizing the final demise of the tunnel system. As of 2013, there have been no officially confirmed tunnel entrances. But according to some reports, you can still go down there from the Butler, the Math Building, Havemeyer, and Lewisson. Now brush off your clothes as we proceed to another historic site, City Hall. This will be a real journey through time. Don't worry, you won't get arrested for trespassing. Here's your ticket. They sell out very quickly, so you're in luck. We're now stepping back into the early 20th century New York. The subway station beneath City Hall in Lower Manhattan opened in 1904. Closed in 1945, it has since become popular among urban explorers. Remember when we said the first subway was actually built in 1844 under Atlantic Avenue? So the second underground public transport system was designed in 1870 by inventor, publisher and lawyer Alfred Ely Beach. He called it the Beach Pneumatic Transit. Beach actually built another prototype of the subway. It took him 58 days and $350,000 of his own money. About $6.2 million in today's dollars to construct the tunnel. The first passengers were people brave enough to travel this unusual route and wealthy enough to pay 25 cents, which is 5 times what the future subway would cost. Beach's prototype was a success and proved that the underground transportation was not only possible but could be popular. The inventor lost his funding during the recession of 1873, and his tube was sealed off and forgotten until 1912. It was then accidentally unearthed by workers constructing the R-Line. The tunnel and carriage were destroyed. Meanwhile, people continued to rely on trains and the most sophisticated railway construction methods were found. The first elevated railroad opened in New York in 1868, but the blizzard of 1888 exposed its flaws. Nearly 0.6 meters, 2 feet of snow buried the unprepared city, trapping 15,000 New Yorkers on elevated trains, some for as long as 24 hours. It became clear that we needed proper underground transportation as it was more reliable and safer. And in 1900, the private Interborough Rapid Transit Company, IRT, began constructing another subway station and completed it in 1904. On its opening day, 150,000 people passed through the old City Hall station, which accommodated 5-car trains. The New York Transit Museum later named it the Jewel in the Crown. Designed by renowned architects Hines and Lafarge, the station featured brass light fixtures, wrought iron chandeliers, and 3 skylights, adorned with Gustavino tiles, setting it apart from other stations. On the first trip, a group of dignitaries led by Mayor George McClellan travelled 14.6 kilometres, 9.1 miles through 28 stations. Tickets were sold at the box office for 5 cents, a fare that remained unchanged until 1948, when it was raised to 10 cents. However, the first trip was too much to take for some people. They bought tickets but never tried to board the train. They just stood on the platform and marvelled at the miracle of modern engineering. Yet the station wasn't without its issues. The cramped conditions and crowded spaces soon attracted criminals. In fact, the station had not been open for even 15 minutes before someone had already been robbed. Despite these challenges, the benefits far outweighed the drawbacks, with 1 million passengers using the station in its first week alone. Over time, as the nearby Brooklyn Bridge Express station grew more popular, passenger traffic at City Hall Station began to decline. In the last year of its operation, only 600 people a day passed under the station's richly decorated arches. The station was closed permanently in 1945, but it's still considered an active part of the metro system. Train number 6 turns around here approximately once every 8 minutes. There are 472 subway stations in New York. Tunnels vary in depth, but are typically 9 to 36 meters, that's 30 to 120 feet below street level. And New York's deepest station, 191st Street, is 53 meters, 173 feet underground. Is there anything deeper than this? Indeed, there is. For example, sewer pipes are typically found at depths of several tens of centimeters, tens of inches, as seen along Lexington Avenue line, to as deep as 18 floors below, like St. Nicholas Avenue. Further down in the most remote reaches of the underground at depths of 60 to 243 meters, that's 200 to 800 feet, lie 3 critical water tunnels. These tunnels are integral to New York's water supply system, one of the largest and most complex in the world. Tunnel number 1, opened in 1917, is the oldest of the 3 and spans more than 112 kilometers, 70 miles. For many decades, it was the city's main water supply. It flows from reservoirs upstate through Bronx, Manhattan, and Queens, ensuring a steady water supply. Water Tunnel number 2, constructed in 1936, serves as an additional line to Tunnel number 1. It extends approximately 97 kilometers, 60 miles, and passes under the Bronx, Queens, Brooklyn, and Staten Island. The tunnel increases the reliability of the water supply system and offers a backup during repairs and emergencies in Tunnel number 1. But the most ambitious is Water Tunnel number 3, the largest capital construction project in New York's history. Upon completion, it will exceed 97 kilometers, 60 miles in length. Project 3 is designed to provide the city with a critical third link to the city's water supply, allowing for the first-time closure and maintenance of Tunnels 1 and 2. Construction began in 1970, and some parts of the tunnel have been operational since 1998 and 2013. The remaining sections will be completed by 2032. This means the construction of the tunnel will have spanned more than 50 years. Now it's time to go closer to the surface. There are a few more legendary sites we need to explore. Our journey will take us through popular buildings and parks in New York, or more precisely what lies beneath them. First on our list is the catacombs of the Basilica of St. Patrick's Old Cathedral. It was in this basilica that Francis Ford Coppola filmed the baptism scene in The Godfather. Let's take the stairs to where the catacombs begin. These are the only Catholic catacombs in Manhattan and also serve as an entire underground cemetery. Unlike the ancient catacombs of Paris and Rome, you won't find scattered bones here. Instead, as you walk along the dimly lit 37-metre, 120-foot long corridor of the crypt, you'll learn about the famous people buried here. Take, for instance, the final resting place of General Thomas Eckert, a confidant of Abraham Lincoln. The walls here were tiled by engineer and builder Raphael Gustavino, famous for his work at the Grand Central Station. There were also original Thomas Edison lamps. Remarkably, these catacombs remain active in the 21st century, offering cremation niches for sale. To date, over 350 niches have been filled and hundreds more are being built and sold on a first-come, first-served basis. The issue price is from $10,000 to $15,000. Having explored this impressive place, it's time for us to move on to the aptly named Freedom Tunnel located beneath Riverside Park. It has long been an integral part of New York. This tunnel is owned by the Amtrak Railroad Company. Its entrance is a mere 5-minute walk from 125th Street, terminating at a fence-like barrier. The tunnel extends approximately 4.2 kilometers, 2.6 miles from 72nd to 124th Streets. But we don't recommend trying to get into it because, as we said earlier, it's private property. The tunnel was built in the 1930s by Robert Moses. Over the course of 50 years, it was closed and reopened several times, serving freight trains. In 1980, it was completely shut down. It wasn't used for its intended purpose for 11 years. During this time, the tunnel turned into a real art gallery. The fact is that it was favoured by graffiti artists. Back in the 1980s and the 1990s, there was a tent city at the southern end of the tunnel with illegal electricity and hundreds, perhaps thousands of residents. They were known as Mole People and lived in a tunnel trying to avoid New York's crime-ridden streets of the 1980s. Some say that the city and the police actually allowed them to be there, believing that it was safer than wandering the streets. The tunnel's name is partly linked to those people. After all, they were looking for shelter and the freedom to live without rent or supervision from law enforcement. In 1991, the tunnel was reopened to trains when Amtrak purchased it, leading to mass eviction. The slum was bulldozed and the homeless were forced to leave the area. However, graffiti artists and urban explorers continued to visit the tunnel. In the 2000s, they were occasionally caught and removed by the Amtrak Police Department. In late 2009, the company initiated a project to repaint the tunnel, aiming to restore its original look. As a result, many frescoes disappeared, including the central one dedicated to the former tunnel inhabitants. For some reason, the job wasn't completed, and today the freshly painted walls are once again adorned with new layers of graffiti. Take one last look at these artworks before we move on to the next mysterious destination, Track 61. This is a storage track adjacent to a private train platform on the Metro North Railroad in Manhattan. The platform is part of the Grand Central Station complex and is located under the trendy upscale walled-off Astoria Hotel. Tracks 61 and 63 at Grand Central Terminal were originally built to transport freight and served as loading docks for the steam power plant on 49th Street. When the walled-off Astoria Hotel acquired the land above these tracks in 1929, it also took ownership of the track below. The outdated steam power plant was demolished along with other buildings on the site. That same year, the New York Times reported that underneath the hotel there would be a private railroad entrance for guests with private railroad cars. The first person to use this private station was General John Pershing in 1938. According to the New York Times, he arrived in a special railroad car which was directed to a ramp under the hotel. From there, Pershing accessed an elevator leading up to the hotel. The example of General Pershing shows that the secret route was indeed used by hotel guests to enter the hotel undetected. But most often, Track 61 is associated with President Roosevelt, who used it in 1944. The report of that day stated that the president would leave the hotel by the same route as he entered it, that is, through the elevator on the east side of Lexington Avenue, and then proceed through the central elevators to the New York Central siding in the hotel's basement. After this, the track became known as the Presidential Siding. A popular myth suggests that Roosevelt's private rail car has been left abandoned on the track since 1945. Legend has it that the president would drive his bulletproof Pierce Arrow limousine straight into his personal railcar, which was then transported to Track 61. Once under the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, the car would drive out of the railcar onto the platform and be delivered by elevator directly to the hotel. These measures were taken to hide Roosevelt's polio symptoms. However, a 2012 article in Trains magazine clarified that the Waldorf Astoria Hotel did have a car lift. This lift serviced the basement, ground floor and the first 3 floors, but it wasn't connected to the railway. It was primarily used for transporting cars to the ballroom for events. But in the 21st century, the myth about the abandoned president's carriage was debunked. It turned out to be merely luggage storage, and fitting the Pierce Arrow limousine into it would have been a challenge. The car is now on display at the Danbury Railway Museum. But Roosevelt wasn't the only president associated with Track 61. Every president since Herbert Hoover has stayed at the Waldorf Astoria's presidential suite. Therefore, it's quite plausible that they used a secret entrance. According to an article in the New York Post, this route was used by President George W. Bush's Secret Service, Secretary of State Colin Powell, and the National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice. And in 1965, Track 61 made headlines again when American artist and contemporary art star Andy Warhol hosted a party there. Today it is no longer in use. However, if you're lucky, you might catch a glimpse of this famous track while travelling on the Metro North out of Grand Central Terminal. Alright, it's now time to leave the hotel and move to one of the main attractions of New York, Central Park. Did you know that there was once a whole district in this place? And who lived there? Where did these people go? And what was uncovered during the excavations? Before Central Park's creation, the village of Seneca, primarily an African-American community, occupied the area from West 82nd to West 89th Street. The village existed from 1825 to 1857 and had 225 residents by 1855. Of these, approximately 2/3 were African Americans and the rest were Irish and German immigrants. The village formation began in 1825 when local landowners John and Elizabeth Whitehead divided their land into 200 lots and sold some of them. The first 3 lots were purchased for $125 by Andrew Williams, a 25-year-old African American shoe shiner. Epiphany Davis, a store clerk, bought another 12 lots for $578, and the AME Zion Church acquired 6 more. This is how the community was born. From 1825 to 1832, the Whiteheads sold about half of their land to other African Americans. As a result, by the early 1830s, there were about 10 houses in the village. By the mid-1850s, it had expanded to 50 houses. At its peak, the village had 3 churches, 2 schools and 3 cemeteries. In the mid-19th century, many New Yorkers perceived those who lived in Seneca Village as poor people living in the shacks, unaware that many of them were landowners. The residents, primarily African Americans, worked as laborers or in various services. Also, most of their children attended school. That is, compared to other African Americans living in New York City, Seneca Village residents were significantly more prosperous and therefore legally eligible to vote. Back then, the US still had property qualifications for voting. Notably, of the 100 black New Yorkers eligible to vote in 1845, 10 lived in the village of Seneca. However, in the early 1850s, city officials began planning a large municipal park to offer New Yorkers a recreational space. In 1853, the New York State Legislature passed a law that set aside 314 hectares, 775 acres, in Manhattan from 59th to 106th Streets, between 5th and 8th Avenues, to create the first large public park in the country. As a result, the residents of the Seneca Village had to leave their homes. To this day, we don't know where they went. Despite its short history of just 32 years, Seneca Village was a close-knit community, a beacon of stability during turbulent times. You probably thought we were done with dungeons. Well, we aren't. And you're about to get a little wet because we're going to find out if anyone lives under New York City. Rumors have it that some creatures definitely inhabit its underworld. And no, we're not talking about ordinary rats, but alligators. Stories about these sewer-dwelling creatures are mostly fictional and date back to the late 1920s and early 1930s. The New York Times reports that the city rescues about 100 alligators annually. Rescues from whom? Well, from people. Some are confiscated from homes where they're kept as illegal pets. Interestingly, in the USA, you can legally purchase an alligator online with a permit, provided it's still small. However, some unconscientious people keep these reptiles at home illegally, often turning their lives into torture. Of course, some of them try to escape. Although such escapees can survive for a short time in the New York sewers, they will not last long there for obvious reasons, due to low temperatures and bacteria in the sewerage. Sewer maintenance crews confirm that there's no underground alligator population. However, the sewer alligator story was very popular in the 1930s, evolving over several decades and becoming another urban legend. Some even believe that this is a hoax created by Teddy May, who was the commissioner of the sewers at the time. His interviews laid the groundwork for the first published accounts of these reptiles in the tunnels. This topic has captivated New Yorkers to such an extent that they've even established a special day, February 9th, which became known as Alligators in the Sewers Day in Manhattan. Is this story totally made up? How could alligators really get into the sewer? In the mid-20th century, gift shops in Florida sold live baby alligators in small aquariums. New York tourists, charmed by these tiny creatures, often brought them home. However, as the alligators grew larger and began to cause problems, some cruel owners flushed these animals down the toilet. Or according to Sewer Commissioner May, not into the toilet, but into the storm drains. Some versions go further and claim that, after spending so much time in such conditions and complete darkness, alligators grew up blind and lost their pigment, turning albino. This subject has also captivated writers. In all kinds of fiction, characters also often release animals into the street or wash them down the drain. And the 1980s film Alligator features a giant mutant alligator, a victim of toxic chemical waste. Recently, some real-life incidents have proven that such legends were not always myths. In 2010, New York police caught a baby alligator, 0.6 meters, 2 feet long, in a sewer in Queens. By the way, such amazing things happen not only in New York. In 2017, alligators were seen in the sewers in Florida. Even more recently, in 2023, Florida workers found a 1.5 meter, 5-foot reptile in a storm pipe. But it's time for us to get back to the surface. We bet you're now looking at the city of skyscrapers with completely different eyes. This city is often called the City of Magnificent Distances, the nation's capital city. It has a population of only about 689,000 people, but this is where the highest-ranking officials of the United States live and work. And it's here that the most crucial decisions are made that affect nearly the entire world. Its magnificent distances stretch not only on its surface but also below it. Its underground holds incredible secrets of the world. Today you'll learn, where is the second Washington Monument you didn't know about? What's hidden beneath the Capitol? What lies beneath the White House? And generally speaking, what lies beneath Washington, D.C.? Right now we're on Pennsylvania Avenue. This is a major road which connects the Capitol and the White House. It's often called America's Main Street. Shall we take a look underneath? In Washington, D.C., the top layer of the city street asphalt is typically about 5 to 10 centimeters, 2 to 4 inches thick. Beneath that, on some historic streets like Pennsylvania Avenue, lies the most massive part. A concrete base with a thickness of at least 15 centimeters, 6 inches, and in some places up to 30 centimeters, 12 inches. Below this is a layer of sand and gravel lying 15 to 30 centimeters, 6 to 12 inches deep. And in certain areas, special geotextile materials. Pennsylvania Avenue resembles a richly layered cake. But it wasn't always this high-tech. This is a very old street. The first semblance of a road appeared here back in 1774. But the first documented reference to Pennsylvania Avenue was found in Thomas Jefferson's letter dated 1791. It's worth noting that Washington, D.C. was founded in 1790, meaning that the street predates the city itself. Over the course of more than 200 years, it's been reconstructed several times. Things are a bit different on Grace Street in the Georgetown neighborhood. The first couple of inches here are the usual asphalt, but suddenly, what is this? This doesn't look like gravel, it's cobblestone. In fact, streets with asphalt laid over old historic cobblestones are common in Georgetown. Sometimes they peek through the damaged pavement. In 2018, during roadwork on Grace Street, the asphalt was stripped away to lay a new layer. The entire street looked like this for some time. And this sometimes happens in other places. But let's look even deeper under the roads. What can we find down here? So, up to 50 centimeters, 20 inches deep, there are drainage systems. Some small pipes are used to divert rainwater directly from the surface. Further down at depths of up to 100 centimeters, 40 inches, you'll find most of the smaller utility lines. Low voltage electrical cables used for street and residential lighting. Telephone and internet cables connecting homes and offices. Small gas and water pipes supplying homes and small buildings. The water supply pipes are particularly important. They must be laid at least 152 millimeters, 6 inches below the local frost line, but not less than 305 millimeters, 12 inches below ground level. At depths of approximately 100 to 200 centimeters, 40 to 80 inches, one can find larger water supplies, gas supplies and sewage pipes, as well as high voltage power cables. From here, we'll move even deeper. At a depth of 3.6 meters, 12 feet, beneath an ordinary manhole cover, there's something that looks exactly like the Washington Monument obelisk, only about 50 times smaller. Though smaller, it's still quite large. Let's take a closer look and measure it. The obelisk is made of concrete. It measures 3.8 meters in length and 0.9 meters wide at the base, tapering to 0.45 meters at the top. It even has its own foundation. The obelisk is resting on a concrete platform with an area of 1.1 square meters. The top of the obelisk is flat, as if it were cut off, and is set about a foot below ground level. The unassuming cast iron lid lays on top of the well. So what is it, and why is it here? This is a survey marker used by 19th century engineers to monitor ground movement. At that time, the gentle hill that now firmly supports the monument's foundation didn't exist. Therefore, engineers closely monitored the slightest soil shifts because the city lies on a rather swampy area. This strange object is officially called Benchmark A. It's not just a geodetic control point, but part of a network of over 1 million control points across the country. This network helps the National Geodetic Survey, NGS, keep all government maps in sync. According to NGS's modernization manager Drew Smith, the object is still occasionally used for its intended purpose. For instance, it gave scientists some data after the 2011 Washington earthquake. Measurements over the past century have shown that swampy soil beneath the Washington Monument has risen by 6.2 centimeters, 2.4 inches, at an average rate of 0.5 millimeters, 0.02 inches per year. Okay, but the question remains, why was it buried in the ground? The answer is simple. The mini-monument was installed in the 1880s as part of a transcontinental leveling program. The mound where the obelisk currently stands didn't exist yet. It was piled up later. When it became clear that the mound would completely cover the mini obelisk, a brick sarcophagus was built specifically for it, which eventually became this well. Let's look even deeper under Washington, stopping at a depth of 5 meters, 16 feet. Here you'll find voids, almost like karst sinkholes, scattered here and there across the city, but invisible since they're hidden by a crust of asphalt. But if one day this layer fails under the weight of a heavy truck, something similar to the accident of May 21st, 2013 might happen again. A deep sinkhole vaguely resembling a karst formation appeared at the intersection of 14th and F Streets in northwest Washington that day. As it turned out, it went about 5 meters, 16 feet deep. Here beneath the asphalt, there was also a line of utility conduits, various wires and pipes encased in concrete pipe-like structures. Part of the line body had also collapsed and heavy chunks of concrete fell into the void. And not just to the bottom of the hole, but on the old sewer with a diameter of 137 centimeters. It was built back in 1897 out of brick. And now, almost 110 years later, it was severely damaged by concrete blocks that fell from above. By the way, this wasn't even the oldest section, as Washington's sewer system is about 200 years old. The first structures were built as early as 1810. After the 2013 incident, this section was closed for several days, forcing city residents to abruptly change their routes and work schedules. One might think the incident was resolved. But less than a year later, a similar sinkhole appeared nearby, about 60 centimeters wide and 120 centimeters long, along the northbound 14th Street northwest between Constitution Avenue and Pennsylvania Avenue. Initially, it was thought that a leak from a ruptured sewer pipe might have caused soil erosion under the street. However, workers discovered that there was no water or sewer infrastructure directly beneath the sinkhole. The story even made it into the Washington Post with the headline, "Cause of Sinkhole in 14th Street Northwest Still a Mystery." Unfortunately, such incidents do happen. Underground Washington can be treacherous. And the most annoying thing is that such incidents are almost impossible to predict. No one knows where another such void might be forming beneath the asphalt right now. But it's time for us to move on. We'll stay at roughly the same depth where we explored the underground utilities and continue our journey to uncover even more interesting stuff. At around 6 meters, 20 feet deep, we'll come across tunnels, but this isn't part of the city's subway system. This is the United States Capitol Subway System, a unique transportation network. It consists of 3 underground electric systems for passenger transport, connecting the Capitol with several other facilities, all of the Senate buildings and one of the House of Representatives buildings. The first line was built here in 1909 to connect the Russell Senate Office building with the Capitol. In 1960, an additional monorail line was built for the Dirksen Senate Office building. 5 years later, a 2-car subway line was added, connecting the Rayburn House Office building with the Capitol. In 1982, the Dirksen monorail was extended to the Hart Senate Office building, and in 1993 it was replaced with a fully automated operator-free line. This created a whole network of miniature underground lines. There are 2 separate lines operating on the Senate side. The first is a crude 2-track system, with 1 open car on each track. It connects the Russell Senate building and the Capitol. The second one is a computerized system with 3 enclosed trains, each consisting of 3 cars. The trains run at 90-second intervals. It connects the Hart, Dirksen, and Capitol buildings. Interestingly, the train cars lack their own propulsion systems. The train cars are unpowered. The train is propelled by a trackside linear motor. This line has 2 parallel tracks for most of its length, but at the Hart and Capitol stations, the tracks converge into one with a single-side platform. This makes it easy to return to the opposite path. Dirksen Station has a side platform for Capitol-bound trains and an island platform for Hart-bound trains. All 3 stations are equipped with platform doors. A small maintenance siding is located next to Hart Station. On the House of Representatives side, the old crude 2-track system is still in use. There's 1 open car on each track, carrying passengers between the Rayburn House Office building and the Capitol. The other 4 House Office buildings are not serviced by the subway. 2 of them, Cannon and Longworth, use a common underground pedestrian tunnel, while the other 2, Ford and O'Neill, have no underground connection to the Capitol. The House and Senate subway system do not end in the same place under the Capitol, but are connected by a maze of tunnels. You might think that only CIA agents and other special services use this miniature underground, but in fact, it's a practical means of transportation for government employees. Moreover, even the general public can access it during a tour led by accredited specialists with clearance. Surely there's something even more interesting directly beneath the Capitol. Just below the Capitol Rotunda, at a depth of around 6 meters, 20 feet below the surface, you'll find this. Washington's tomb, but it's empty. How did this happen? You'll find out in a second. When Washington died in 1799, the Capitol was still under construction. Both houses of Congress passed a resolution calling for Washington to be buried in the Capitol once it was completed. However, the plan got bogged down in disputes over the design and the cost of the tomb, so the body of the first President of the United States was placed in a temporary tomb at Mount Vernon, as Washington himself had requested. Further attempts to move his body to the tomb under the Capitol also failed. The tomb remains empty. It used to house and display the Lincoln catafalque. It's now a key attraction in the specially constructed underground Capitol Visitor Center. Indeed, the small tomb has relatively recently become part of a massive, well-designed complex that covers an area of 54,000 square meters over 3 underground levels and can accommodate up to 4,000 visitors at a time. Alright, are there any other interesting things under Washington at a depth of 6 meters, 20 feet? Rumors have it that there are secret underground passages that you can use to get straight to the White House. And today we'll see one of them. To get into it, we need to return to the surface and go to this inconspicuous place on H Street. Here begins a winding path that passes through this closed alleyway, 2 underground tunnels, and finally emerges right in the basement of the White House. This isn't fiction at all, but data based on archival newspaper reports from the early 20th century. At that time, the public was very interested in tunnels, and information security measures on the part of the state were not even nearly as strict as they are now. Now, unlike any other alleys, this unassuming narrow one starts on H Street, just 2 blocks from the head of state's residence. It leads down the block past the towering brick building of the Federal Claims Court, and it ends at a wide but not particularly noticeable doorway at the back of the Treasury Annex on Pennsylvania Avenue. The Treasury Annex, officially known as the Freedman Bank since 2016, was built in 1919 to house the Bureau of Internal Revenue. Local builders Irwin and Layton won the contract to dig a tunnel to connect it to the department headquarters across the street. The sources do not provide clear information about the purpose of the underground passage, but it was most likely needed to protect employees transporting cash from armed robbery. The final segment of the secret entrance to the White House appeared as a byproduct of increased security measures during World War II. In 1941, a sloped tunnel was hastily dug, leading from the East Wing to the Treasury Department headquarters. The press considered this tunnel a wartime secret until Congressman Claire E. Hoffman complained about its cost during an open debate in the House of Representatives. As you can see, you can pass by some unremarkable place dozens of times without realizing what incredibly secret objects it leads to. But the interesting stuff doesn't end here. Let's move on to another site, also located about 6 meters, 20 feet below ground. This 232-meter, 761-foot underground structure connects the basement of the White House's East Wing with the underground passages surrounding the United States Treasury building. The tunnel's exact depth is not publicized for security reasons, but it's estimated to be approximately 3 to 6 meters, 10 to 20 feet underground. It was originally built in 1941 so that, in case of emergency, the president could be quickly evacuated from the White House to the underground vaults of the Treasury. Remember, World War II was already in full swing at that time, and such measures were quite reasonable. The tunnel runs under the street and is 2.1 meters, 7 feet high, and 3 meters, 10 feet wide. It's not built in a straight line, but in a zigzag pattern to reduce damage in the event of a direct bomb impact. The zigzag-like structure dampens the shockwave and prevents fragments from scattering over long distances. In various parts of the tunnel, there are small rooms that were once equipped with cribs, so the tunnel could be used as a shelter. The tunnel is now guarded by the Secret Service and equipped with cameras, alarms, and coded locks. Alright, so let's keep on looking for other interesting things in underground Washington. Once again, we find ourselves at a depth of 6 meters, 20 feet, but this time under the National Archives building. As we find ourselves beneath the archive building, we suddenly come across some weird-looking mechanisms and iron structures. It seems like a lifting mechanism, but definitely not a passenger elevator. We can see something resembling a strange sarcophagus, clearly made of iron. And these are perhaps the most valuable relics of the United States. The original copies of the US Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the Declaration of Independence, collectively they are known as the Charters of Freedom. And it's in this place that they're stored at night. Perhaps you'd like to get a bit of background. In April 1952, Congress ordered the Library of Congress to transfer the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution to the National Archives. These two documents had to be placed on public display in the National Archives building, along with the Bill of Rights, which was already in the archives. Although the archives exhibition room was specifically designed to display these two documents, it didn't have a secure place to store the documents when they weren't on display. The National Archives signed a contract with Mosler Safe to build storage underneath the exhibition hall floor. At the time, it was estimated that about 70% of all banks in the United States used Mosler safes and vaults. It's enough to say that they had also worked on projects like a gold bullion vault in Fort Knox and a bank vault in Hiroshima, which survived a nuclear attack. Thus, these guys were reliable in every sense. Of course, the construction wasn't done in the museum building itself or its basement. The company built the vault in Hamilton, Ohio, and then shipped it to Washington for installation. It was made of steel and reinforced concrete. They installed it about 20 feet below the showroom floor. And since it was the Cold War era, the vault was designed to be fireproof, shockproof, and capable of withstanding a powerful blast wave. During exhibitions, 3 legendary documents were displayed in the latest showcases of that time. Every night, an elevator would carefully lower the documents along with their showcases through the floor into this massive 50-ton safe, where they remained overnight. The next morning, the elevator would raise the documents again for everyone to see. Today, the National Archives no longer uses the Mosler safe to protect the Freedom Charter. A major renovation of the National Archives building in the early 2000s included a complete overhaul of the security system guarding the charter. Now we're at a new storage facility built by the famous Diebold. You've probably used ATMs with their logo more than once. Alright, so we've sorted out the museum storage area. And now let's finally go down another 2 meters or so. We're 8 meters, 26 feet underground, in the tunnels beneath DuPont Circle. Fans of the Fallout video game might recognize this location as a vault in the game world. Let's see what's really down here. These tunnels are much more spacious than the previous ones. Judging by the old rails, they were used for transport, although things aren't quite so straightforward. There are a lot of things here that don't really fit together. Some rather poorly made fake trams seem to have been used for a long time as a catering establishment. There are equally strange art installations and walls completely covered with graffiti. In some places we see remnants of supplies, clearly meant for a nuclear war. Personal belongings were left here and there. Someone spent the night here, and more than once. What kind of place is this anyway? Is it a tram tunnel? A conceptual venue? An art installation? A bomb shelter? An abandoned site or a homeless shelter? In fact, all of these put together, just at different times. Over the past 80 years, this place has served each of these purposes. And this is where it all started. In the first half of the 20th century, DuPont Circle experienced catastrophic traffic jams. As a result, over the course of several years, an underground passage for cars was built, along with a couple of concrete tunnels, each circling one side of the circle and designed specifically for trams. But the project turned out to be short-lived. By the end of the 1950s, it became clear that buses would become the primary mode of public transportation. But buses had a hard time fitting into these tunnels. The $4.8 million project, about $60 million by 2024 standards, turned out to be virtually irrelevant by 1961. Soon, even the entrances to the tunnels were sealed off. Scornful critics were throwing around all kinds of insults, calling the project a bugaboo, a white elephant, the blunderpass, and even a boondoggle. But things escalated pretty quickly and this became no laughing matter. The Cuban Missile Crisis hit and everyone was concerned about bomb shelters. That's when everyone remembered the abandoned tunnels under DuPont Circle, which suddenly enjoyed the newfound respect. The Civil Defense Department began filling the 7,000 square meters, around 75,000 square feet, under DuPont Circle with all kinds of survival supplies. By the mid-60s, the premises were ready to accommodate about 3,000 people. The tracks were lined with water barrels, portable toilets, and literally tons of civil defense survival biscuits. Sounds like a treat, doesn't it? We all, humanity that is, got lucky back then. Nuclear missiles were never launched. The shelter sat unused for many years until it was reopened in 1974 to retrieve 20 tons of those survival biscuits and send them to starving people in Bangladesh. During the removal process, workers discovered clear signs that someone had lived there for quite some time.
On several occasions, we found people living down there. A few years ago, we found a little apartment set up. They'd been eating the biscuits and using the portable johns. They had moved out already by the time we got there, but we saw plenty of evidence of what had been going on.
So the space under DuPont Circle wasn't destined to be used as a bomb shelter either. From the mid-1990s, for 2 decades, it had been proposed to turn the tunnels into an underground shopping centre, a health club, a food market, and even into a columbarium. That is, a repository for cremated remains, but the tunnels remained unused. Then, businessman Gary Simon turned the tunnels into a tram-themed restaurant complex, but the idea failed due to poor execution. The latest and current chapter of this underground saga began in 2005, when designer and architect Julian Hunt noticed a staircase leading somewhere underground. Together with his partner Lucretia Laudi, they created the Arts Coalition for the DuPont Underground. As a result, they turned a crumbling abandoned building into a fascinating art space. At the grand opening in 2016, thousands of white plastic balls, previously used in an exhibit at the National Building Museum, formed structures throughout the tunnel, creating towers and mazes along abandoned railway tracks. In 2022, the country renewed the lease for another 10 years. What's interesting is that if the DuPont Circle tunnels continue to function in their current capacity until the end of the current lease term, they will have existed longer as an art space than what they were originally intended to be. Well, perhaps this is their real calling. Let's keep on looking for something interesting. What will we find next? At a depth of around 11 meters, 36 feet, we'll see the foundation of the Washington Monument. Let's come to the surface for a moment to admire this gigantic structure. With a height of 169 meters, 555 feet, this is the tallest obelisk in the world. It is 30 meters, 100 feet taller than the highest Egyptian pyramid. Before the Eiffel Tower was built, it was the tallest man-made structure in the world. That's what's on the outside, and it's undoubtedly impressive. But what lies underneath? What holds up all this huge mass of stone and marble weighing more than 90,000 metric tons? If you didn't know, the hill the obelisk stands on is largely man-made. Now the lower part of the monument is completely hidden underground. Originally, it looked like this. This was after the very first foundation structure had been significantly redesigned and reinforced. The construction of the foundation took place over several decades in two major phases. Interestingly, the obelisk itself was built simultaneously with the foundation. The first stage began with the excavation of approximately 2.3 meters, 7.5 feet, of topsoil. On this bed of the foundation, the cornerstone was ceremoniously laid in the northeast corner of the proposed foundation. The rest of the foundation was then constructed of bluestone gneiss rubble and spalls, with every crevice filled with lime mortar. The dimensions of this old foundation were 7.1 meters, 23.3 feet high, 24.4 meters, 80 feet wide at the base, and 17.8 meters, 58.3 feet wide at the top. It looked like a truncated step pyramid, much like those of the Mayans. A square well, 60 centimeters, 23 inches wide, was lined with brick in the center bricks to a depth of 6 meters, 20 feet below the foundation's base. It was needed to supply water during construction. It would seem that such a structure would be super reliable and durable. But then calculations showed that the expected weight of the monument would be too great. So it was decided to reinforce the foundation. A large unreinforced concrete slab was soon added. It lay below the perimeter of the old foundation. The slab was 4.1 meters, 13.5 feet thick around its outer perimeter. Massive concrete buttresses were added on the sides, which is why the old foundation had to be partially dismantled. In the end, this reinforced structure had a total depth of 11.2 meters, 36.7 feet, below the base of the lowest row of marble blocks, which are now also hidden underground. Then, in 1880 to 1881, while the rest of the monument was being built, this reinforced foundation was covered with earth. The result was a steep-sided mound with a terrace 18 meters, 59 feet wide at the base of the obelisk walls. It turned out that the ground level rose 5.2 meters, 17 feet to the base of the mine. By 1887 to 88, a mound was added around the terrace extending about 90 meters, 295 feet from the monument. This earthen terrace and hill provided additional support for the foundation. And of course, it's simply beautiful. Almost at the same level in the northeast corner, there's a strange stone block that clearly stands out from the rest. This is the same cornerstone mentioned earlier, which was solemnly laid into the foundation of the monument on July 4th, 1848. James K. Polk, the 11th President of the United States, presided over the ceremony. Moreover, for ceremonial purposes, he used the same trowel that George Washington himself had used when laying the Capitol's cornerstone 55 years earlier. It's a large marble block weighing 11,100 kilos, around 24,500 pounds, standing at 0.76 meters, that's 2.5 feet tall, with each side measuring 2 meters, 6.5 feet in length. It's not just a symbolic stone, it's a time capsule. Moreover, it's very roomy. Inside, there's a zinc case filled with memorabilia. Let's take a look inside to see what the ancestors of modern Americans put in this time capsule. Copies of major documents, Declaration of Independence, US Constitution, Bill of Rights. Coins and medals minted at that time. A whole newspaper file containing mentions of George Washington himself or the monument. And much more, 71 items in total. This would now be an incredibly valuable relic. But when placing it, the workers were rather careless, resulting in a piece of the stone breaking off. Here it is. It was picked up and carefully preserved by a certain Joseph Meredith Toner, a Washington resident, physician, philanthropist, and amateur historian. He enjoyed collecting anything related to George Washington. Well, then it seems like we've seen everything interesting here. Let's continue our journey. We're going down even deeper, reaching a depth of 12 meters, 40 feet. We find ourselves in the catacombs. And here comes yet another surprise. As you'll see in a moment, it's quite a shocking one. Judging by the surroundings, this place is clearly somehow related to the era of early Christianity. As we walk through the tunnel, we notice ominous signs that confirm this guess. These are wall burials, reminiscent of early Christian graves in the catacombs of ancient Rome. Hold on, what? Ancient Rome? What? Early Christians? We're in the USA, not in Europe, and in Washington, a city built in the 18th century. But what is it and what kind of burials are these? In fact, these are not burial sites at all, but simply stylization. That's it, it's fake, except for one thing. This underground complex is located under the Franciscan monastery of the Holy Land. It was built at the turn of the 20th century by a group of Franciscan friars with a very noble intention. They wanted to create a replica of part of the Holy Land for North Americans who couldn't afford a trip abroad. These catacombs have official paper approval and contain one actual skeleton, which appears to be that of a 7 or 8-year-old child. Legend has it that the bones belong to a 2nd century martyr and were brought to Washington from the catacombs of St. Callistus in 1929. I wonder what else could be hidden under Washington at the depth of up to 12 meters, 40 feet. Let's take a look under the Lincoln Memorial, where there's a massive underground space. About 4,000 square meters, 43,800 square feet. Where did it come from? The memorial's construction began in 1914 on marshy land known as the Potomac Flats. There wasn't much choice, as the entire city essentially sits on marshland. The Army Corps of Engineers just completed a multi-year project to prepare the memorial's foundation. Workers had to dig an enormous pit 12 meters, 39 feet deep. They then poured dozens of concrete columns to support the future marble structure above. After that, they built everything else, and the memorial became what we know today. But what happened to the dungeon? They completely forgot about it for 60 years. It wasn't until 1975, during renovation work, that it was rediscovered. The Washington Post reported at the time that as part of the preparations for the memorial's bicentennial, during restroom renovations, crews began digging into the building's foundation and discovered a vast, forgotten space. They brought along some spelunking friends who were amazed to find that over those 60 years, the basement had turned into a real cave with stalactites and its own ecosystem, including insects, rodents, and other living creatures. Another interesting find was historical graffiti made back in 1914. These rock paintings were made by the very workers who built the memorial. For a time, the National Park Service offered flashlight tours of the underground, but they were abruptly discontinued in 1989 when a hiker spotted asbestos there and alerted the authorities. In the following years, they couldn't decide what to do with this find. But in the end, the premises were given to the National Park Service, which intends to create a new, modern exhibition space of 1,400 square meters, 15,000 square feet. There will be multimedia presentations and new exhibits about Lincoln's life. Visitors will also be able to view the part of the underground space that has become most cave-like. Well, that was really impressive. Is there something even deeper? Preferably something secret? Indeed there is, and to find it, we need to look under the White House. Or rather, under its eastern wing. There is a presidential bunker here which, according to various sources, can be found between 15 and 40 meters, 49 and 130 feet. Despite the shroud of secrecy surrounding it, no one hides the very fact that this place exists. It's officially called the Presidential Emergency Operations Center, and you've probably even seen footage of it on TV. During the tragic events of September 11th, President Bush met with the National Security Council here. Of course, there are many rumors surrounding this place, and none of them can be confirmed or denied. Unlike the Capitol's underground chambers, no one will offer you a tour of this site, of course. What else can we find in Washington at this depth? Well, there is something, but for this we need to move to the Russian embassy. Close to this building, about 15 meters, 49 feet underground, we'll see another tunnel leading directly to the embassy. And in the opposite direction, it simply leads to nowhere, to some nondescript area. It's hard to say exactly where. Clearly, no one has looked after this underground structure for many years. So what is this tunnel anyway? A secret passage one could use to secretly escape the embassy, but who and why? Or on the contrary, someone must have climbed there through this tunnel. Actually, neither one nor the other. Here's the thing. Firstly, this building became the Russian embassy only after the USSR's collapse. Before that, it was the Soviet embassy. And the story of this strange tunnel is rooted in that period. It was 1977 when the Cold War was in full swing. Things became more tense when the USSR began constructing a new embassy building near the US Naval Observatory. American media anxiously predicted the espionage consequences of the project. The site was located on a hill clearly overviewing the Capitol and the White House. The media wrote that laser beam listening devices now were being installed by Soviet technicians. They have a clear line of sight to the White House and the Capitol, and so on. The US intelligence community launched a surveillance counterattack codenamed Operation Monopoly. Having purchased a house with several rooms nearby, the FBI and NSA began digging a tunnel towards the construction site. The plan was for the tunnel to allow agents to eavesdrop on electronic communications in the building above. The plan seemed quite feasible. The United States already had experience conducting similar missions in East Berlin. However, as the tunnel got closer to the embassy, the costs grew exorbitantly. According to an article published in the New York Times in 2001, the final cost of the 90-meter, about 300-foot passage reached several $100 million. Operation Monopoly ended in a double failure. Firstly, there were technical problems, including flooding and malfunctioning NSA equipment, and secondly, the secret construction project was given away to the Soviet authorities by FBI double agent Robert Hanssen. An article published in the Washington Post in February 2016 identified the specific house at the intersection of Fulton Street and Bellevue Terrace, also noting that the tunnel had been filled with concrete. However, the building was soon demolished, and by August 2016, only its foundation remained. Alright, let's move on. We're going lower and lower until finally reaching another tunnel at a depth of 60 meters, 200 feet. We find ourselves in the Washington, D.C. Metro, at one of the deepest stations in North America. Forest Glen, on the Red Line. Another thing that makes this station unique is that it doesn't have escalators. Passengers get onto the platforms using high-speed elevators. The next station on the same Red Line, Wheaton, has the longest continuous escalator in the United States and in the entire Western Hemisphere. It's 70 meters, 230 feet long. The very idea of building a metro system in this challenging swampy area was very ambitious. Construction began in 1969, and already in 1976 the first line, Red, welcomed its first passengers. Now it's a whole network of 6 lines: red, blue, orange, yellow, green and silver. The system includes over 90 stations and extends over 230 kilometers, 143 miles. Well, it looks like this is the deepest place in underground Washington, where you can find anything created by people. You all probably know when the USA was born, on July the 4th. But do you know where this country was born? It's one of the oldest cities in the United States. Here, the Declaration of Independence was signed and the Constitution adopted. Here, the first US library and hospital opened. Here, ideas were born that changed the course of history. This great city is Philadelphia. But today we'll take a look at this city from a completely different angle, and we'll finally find out what lies beneath Philadelphia. Beneath the streets of Philadelphia hides a complex infrastructure that supports the life of the city. At the very top, at a depth of 10 to 15 centimeters, 4 to 6 inches, lies asphalt, paving stones, or concrete. At a depth of 20 to 30 centimeters, 8 to 12 inches, there's a base course of crushed stone, gravel, or a sand-gravel mixture. For major roads, the base is concrete. At 30 to 60 centimeters, 12 to 24 inches, you can find telecommunication cables. They are close to the surface because they're not affected by winter frost and don't pose any threat. At 45 to 90 centimeters, 18 to 36 inches, you'll see electrical cables. The higher the voltage of the line, the deeper it's laid. Gas supply pipes leading to buildings, as well as rainwater drainage pipes, run at about the same level. Finally, water pipes are laid at a minimum depth of 1 to 1.5 meters, 3.5 to 5 feet. They are installed according to strict standards, taking into account the frost depth in winter. From here to a depth of 3 meters, 10 feet, you might occasionally find not just lifeless utilities, but the piercing echoes of voices from the past. We're talking about archaeological finds which are not uncommon in Philadelphia. The first recorded instance of builders unearthing ancient human remains in the area occurred in 1743. By studying historical newspapers and documenting such cases, as well as tracking incidents over the past few decades, the Philadelphia Archaeological Forum, PAF, has listed 87 discovered burial sites since then. One of the most notable discoveries in recent years was the forgotten Bethel burial ground, which revealed a grim but important chapter in the history of the city's African American community. It all happened by chance. During construction and renovation at the Wekako Playground in the Queen Village neighborhood, workers stumbled upon human remains. Archaeologists quickly identified the burial zone. It wasn't particularly large, about 0.28 acres, but there were a lot of remains. It was found that the cemetery had been established in 1810 when Reverend Richard Allen purchased this land for the Mother Bethel AME Church, specifically to bury deceased members of the African American community. By 1830, 1,716 people had been buried there. From then until 1842, the graves were layered on top of each other. The total number of burials is estimated to be between 3,000 and 5,000. Research on the remains revealed details about the harsh living conditions of African Americans in the 19th century. What struck the archaeologists the most was a tombstone with the following inscription: Amelia Brown, 1819, aged 26 years. Whosoever live and believeth in me, though we be dead, yet shall we live. At the end of the 19th century, the site was transformed into a public park, and its original purpose was forgotten. The cemetery lay deep underground until a historic discovery brought it to light. Today, Bethel Burial Ground serves as a reminder of an important and tragic chapter in Philadelphia's history. This necropolis has become a symbol of African Americans' struggle for recognition and remembrance. Currently, there is a commemorative plaque installed, reminding visitors that for over 100 years, unsuspecting city residents literally walked over the bones of thousands of African Americans. Construction of a large-scale memorial is planned to begin this fall of 2024. In addition to burial sites, another historically significant location was discovered in Philadelphia at approximately the same depth of 3 meters, 10 feet, namely a marketplace. Here's the backstory of this discovery. In early 2022, the Durst Development Corporation was preparing a site along the Delaware River waterfront on Vine Street for the construction of a 25-story building. workers stumbled upon something that made them put the construction on hold and hand the site over to a team of archaeologists. However, archaeological research had been part of Durst's development plan from the start, as this land is a historical site where some of the earliest shipping docks were built about 300 years ago. When archaeologists dug into the site, they found the foundations of shops and offices. This area was once a bustling trade hub near the port, where goods such as flour, salt, sugar, and barreled meat were sold. What sparked the most interest were bones, many of which had been sawn. Nearby, they found floorboards covered with cedar shavings used to absorb blood. Yeah, the archaeologists had discovered an 18th, 19th century slaughterhouse. These eerie artifacts were discovered alongside children's items. Among the many ceramic objects found was a miniature black cup about 2 inches in diameter, presumably a child's toy. In 1850, the entire area burned down due to a powerful explosion of saltpeter at a neighbouring warehouse. As a result, a substantial layer of ash was uncovered during the excavation, which helped date many of the artifacts. Everything discovered at this site, including the brick foundation and lumber, was carefully removed, catalogued, and sent to the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission in Harrisburg for further review. Just a few streets down at the same 3-meter, 10-foot depth, archaeologists uncovered yet another interesting site, the house of the president. When archaeologists began excavating at 6th and Market Street in 2007, they weren't sure that they would find any remnants of the 1767 house where George and Martha Washington once lived. Many believed that any significant remains of the president's house had been destroyed by the city's rapid development in the 19th and 20th centuries. Located at the heart of Philadelphia, this site contained many layers of urban debris. As the archaeologists dug deeper, they traveled further back in time. And reality proved to be much more exciting than they thought. Instead of the anticipated disappointment, researchers had stumbled upon some remarkable discoveries. First, they uncovered almost intact foundations that revealed the layout of the house, including even the presidential office with its oval bay window. By the way, this bay window later inspired the architectural design of the Oval Office in the White House. The excavation also revealed the outlines of an underground passage connecting the kitchen to the main house, as well as the basement. At the basement level, archaeologists found household items, personal belongings, and even remnants of food. Notably, the underground passage and the kitchen basement with a laundry room were not documented in historical records, and there's a deeply unsettling reason for this. It was in these spaces that servants and slaves spent most of their time ensuring the household's operation. These tight spaces confined the already enslaved people hiding them and the institution of slavery itself from the eyes of George Washington's guests. The kitchen was only 7 feet away from the room with the famous bay window. Today, anyone can see this time capsule. The excavation site is now home to the large President's House Memorial. And if we dig a little deeper at around 4 meters, 13 feet, we'll find ourselves in the tunnels of a place whose every inch is steeped in the spirit of bondage. Eastern State Penitentiary, ESP, which opened in 1829 in Philadelphia, was intended to be one of the first truly reformatory institutions in the US, rather than a punitive one. Whether the correctional efforts were successful is a matter of debate, but ESP's architectural and engineering design doesn't fail to impress us, even today. Designed by architect John Haviland, the building featured a unique radial layout resembling the spokes of a wheel. This architecture allowed guards to monitor all prison blocks from a central tower. This concept made ESP one of the most technologically advanced prisons of its time. It also became the prototype for many other penitentiary institutions. Naturally, ESP had an extensive system of underground spaces, including basements and utility tunnels. Some of these had engineering purposes, while others were used by guards to move around or even to illegally isolate the most dangerous prisoners. Klondikes were the utterly dark solitary cells secretly constructed by guards in the mechanical space under one of the prison blocks. These spaces were miserable, tiny holes, too low and narrow for a normal person to either stand up straight or lie down. We'll get back to them because, approximately on the same level, the story of yet another dungeon begins. One that neither the architect nor the prison guards ever envisioned. The prison looks very imposing from the outside, making it hard to believe that anyone could escape. Nonetheless, some prisoners did try. One of them was a legendary Willie Sutton known as the Gentleman Bandit. In April of 1945, he and 12 accomplices completed the construction of a long tunnel from cell 68 under the prison wall. The chief engineer was inmate Clarence Kleindienst. The tunnel started with a 78-centimeter, 31-inch passage in the cell wall, then went down 4 meters, 13 feet, and continued horizontally about 30 meters, 100 feet beneath the prison wall. Spoons and tin cans were used as tools. The tunnel even had a basic ventilation and wooden supports. Halfway through it crossed a brick sewer collector, which eased the disposal of excess soil and other waste. Despite their efforts, most of the escapees, including Sutton, were captured the same day. As a punishment, they were placed in the above-mentioned illegal dark cells, the Klondikes. The tunnel was filled with cement shortly after the escape, and its exact location was lost for a long time. However, this case became a part of a local law and was remembered by new generations. In 2005, on the 60th anniversary of the daring escape, a team of archaeologists studied the site using ground-penetrating radar. During the excavation, part of the tunnel was found, still intact underground. Robots and cameras were sent inside to document the remaining structural elements. Thanks to this research, Sutton's tunnel was brought back into the spotlight and became part of the exhibits at the prison museum. By the way, long before Sutton, many inmates were eager to leave the hospitable walls of this institution by any means. During the building's restoration in the 1930s, workers discovered about 30 unfinished underground tunnels dug by prisoners. At roughly the same depth as those tunnels, about 4 meters, 13 feet underground, on the very outskirts of Philadelphia, lies a special place where every inch is steeped in the dramatic history of the United States. These are the dungeons of Fort Mifflin, built in the mid-18th century. This fort played a key role in the American Revolution and later in the Civil War. It's often called the fort that saved America. If you ever find yourself flying into Philadelphia, you'll be able to see the whole fort clearly as you approach runway 27R before landing. The dungeons of Fort Mifflin are a complex network of tunnels and chambers hidden beneath the main fortifications. Originally, they were used for storing ammunition. Later, the fort's casemates were converted into prison cells for disciplinary offenders, deserters, military criminals, and prisoners of war. During the Civil War, in 1863, a breakdown in prisoner exchanges forced both sides to detain thousands of captives. At that time, Fort Mifflin was being used as a military prison. The cells were overcrowded. According to the prisoners themselves, it was so dark that even during the day, nothing could be seen without a candle. There were no beds or bunks. Prisoners lay on wooden boards. They were fed only pork, bread, and beef, but the meat was often spoiled, causing severe food poisoning. One of the most famous inmates of Fort Mifflin's dungeons was William Howe, who was hanged for desertion in 1864. Legend has it that his ghost still appears in the casemates. Another spirit, the ghost of a soldier who died during the fort's siege in 1777, is rumoured to still guard the casemates. But perhaps the most famous story is that of the Screaming Lady. It is said that a woman named Elizabeth, who lost her son at the fort, still screams in the casemates. Staff and visitors claim they sometimes hear her voice and see her shadow in old-fashioned clothes. You can find out for yourself whether these ghosts really exist. Fort Mifflin is now open to tourists. though only its historic section. Officially, Fort Mifflin still serves as an active base for the US Army Corps of Engineers, making it the oldest active military base in the US and the only active base that existed before the Declaration of Independence. Fort Mifflin's dungeons are not the only ones surrounded by mystery, rumors, and superstition. There's another such place in underground Philadelphia at a depth of 4 to 5 meters, 13 to 16 feet. We're talking about the dungeons of the Masonic Temple in Philadelphia. Once, its South Tower was the highest point in Philadelphia. However, the public was more intrigued not by the highest point, but rather by the temple's dungeons. Rumor had it that the Masons conducted, or still conduct, secret rituals there of a somewhat unclear nature, which is a bit unsettling. But first, let's briefly discuss what this temple is actually about. This impressive historical building in Philadelphia was constructed between 1868 and 1873. It's located at 1 North Broad Street, right across from Philadelphia's City Hall. You might wonder, is this proximity coincidental or deliberate? The temple still serves as the headquarters of the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania of Free and Accepted Masons. It also houses the Masonic Library and Museum of Pennsylvania. Thousands of visitors come annually to admire the richly decorated building, which includes 7 lodge rooms where various Philadelphia lodges and the Grand Lodge hold their meetings. Such openness seems at odds with the long-standing notion of the Masons as a secret society, allegedly controlling the world. Perhaps all of this is just for show, while the real action takes place in the temple's dungeons. Here's what the representatives of Masonic Temple themselves say and notably show about them. One Masonic myth says that underground tunnels link the Masonic Temple in Philadelphia and Philadelphia City Hall. NBC's short-lived spy drama, Allegiance, was one source of this myth. In reality, this is only half true. The Masonic Temple has tunnels, but they do not connect to any surrounding buildings. For the particularly suspicious conspiracy theorists, the executive director of the Masonic Library and Museum of Pennsylvania himself, Mike McKee, personally descended into the temple's basements to show what goes on down there. The basements are just like any other basements, cramped and far too small for any kind of meeting, and the setting is far from the Masonic aesthetic, to say the least. Although if you bang a hammer on the iron base of the staircase, the sound is really epic, and you can hear it all the way up in the hall. It almost makes the basement seem gigantic. Well, one must admit this tour will hardly convince everyone that there is nothing particularly secretive at the Philadelphia Masonic Temple, especially since McKee himself is a Mason, a member of Jerusalem Lodge number 506, Philadelphia. And sometimes it seems as if nature hints that there's more to this temple than meets the eye. But even if those mysterious tunnels under the Masonic Temple don't exist, or if they are simply not shown to us, we do know where you can find some tunnels. However, there's no hint of mystery there, and they weren't exactly built for people. We are talking about some of the city's rivers that were incorporated into Philadelphia's sewer system tunnels at around 9 meters, 30 feet underground. A little backstory here. Much of Pennsylvania is covered in rivers and streams. Home to 6 major watersheds, the state is practically seeping with water. However, despite being wedged between 2 large rivers, Philadelphia seems a bit dry. Moreover, if you look at historical maps, you'll see that the area of Old Philadelphia was once crisscrossed by streams, springs, swamps, and ponds. There were at least several notable rivers that served as tributaries to the large rivers we've mentioned before, the Delaware and the Schuylkill rivers. What happened here? Well, the same thing that happened as in almost any other major city in the world. Philadelphia's population grew along with its economy, and by 1900 the city had more than 1 million residents. So some rivers were buried underground in extensive tunnel systems to carry sewage and stormwater to treatment plants before being released into the Schuylkill River. One example is the Mill Creek Stream, which was strong enough to serve as a power source for sawmills and gristmills in the early 19th century. In the 20th century, people stopped using it in this capacity and sent it underground to retire. Mill Creek still partially flows above ground, originating from a spring in the town of Mirion. You can see its waters disappearing into a tunnel near the Overbrook Regional Rail Station. And in 1952, a major sinkhole opened up on Sansom Street, right over the artificial channel of Mill Creek, briefly exposing part of the city's hidden underbelly to its residents. Or take another stream, Minnow Run. It was once a fairly strong current flowing along a winding route to the 21st and Market Streets. It then bent west to 21st and Arch Streets, where it entered the Schuylkill River through a wide inlet. Many such streams have disappeared from the city's surface. In total, several hundred miles of them. The largest of these now flow right along the streets, only underground. But there is something else that follows similar routes along the streets. These are also tunnels, but much more serious than sewer ones. We're talking about entire railway lines running right under the streets and buildings of the city, also at a depth of up to 9 meters, 30 feet. And this isn't the subway, but a real railway used by heavy freight trains. For example, the tunnel under the Benjamin Franklin Parkway is used mainly for transporting goods, connecting various parts of the city's industrial and commercial network. It plays an important role in Philadelphia's transportation system. This underground integration into the dense urban environment allows freight transportation to move without disrupting traffic on the surface. But sometimes incidents happen. For instance, in 2018, a rail car derailed in the tunnel near Paynes Park Skate Park at around 8:30 a.m. Fortunately, no one was injured and no hazardous materials were spilled. In general, the purpose of railway tunnels where trains can run is clear. They're an integral part of the transportation system. However, in Philadelphia, there are tunnels at about the same depth that have not been used for many years and have since turned into eerie places. Perhaps the most notable of these is a massive abandoned tunnel stretching from 27th Street all the way to the city centre. Few people know, but this underground passage is part of the City Branch, an extension of the Reading Viaduct. Incidentally, the viaduct itself was abandoned for many years until the start of restoration efforts in 2016. The City Branch Tunnel now formally belongs to SEPTA, Philadelphia's transit authority, but the city has yet to decide what to do with it. Only rare enthusiasts dare to walk through this tunnel, risking encountering unpleasant things. Dirt, trash, homeless encampments, their waste, or something even worse. The question is, why did this massive tunnel end up abandoned? The reasons are complicated. A partial deindustrialization of the city, changes in logistics, and economic factors. Plus, the delivery of large volumes of newsprint by rail became obsolete. There were plans to freshen up the tunnel as part of the Rail Park project, but so far the tunnel has retained its grim aesthetic. And here we've finally reached the most complex, tangled, occasionally unsafe, and in some parts mysterious aspect of Philadelphia's underground world. We're referring to the Philadelphia subway, which reaches depths of up to 12 meters, 40 feet. Its history dates back to the early 20th century, when the rapidly growing city needed fast and efficient transportation to handle increasing passenger flows. The first section of the subway was opened in 1907, connecting 15th Street Station with 69th Street. This line was later extended east and west, eventually evolving into the most extensive system known as the Market Frankfurt Line. The second main subway line, the Broad Street Line, opened in 1928, connecting the northern and the southern parts of the city. Today, Philadelphia's subway is operated by SEPTA, Southeastern Pennsylvania Transportation Authority, and includes the same two main lines, Market Frankfurt and Broad Street. Of course, they've significantly expanded since then. They're also unfinished and abandoned tunnels and stations, and these places are perfect mystery hunting spots. Alongside the subway system, a whole network of underground passageways, lobbies, and other spaces of unclear purpose has formed under Philadelphia year after year. This network is now known as the subway concourses. Built by the Philadelphia Transit Company in the early 20th century, the underground passages beneath city center Philadelphia played an important supporting role in the construction of subway tunnels. Over time, they expanded into a large network of underground pedestrian walkways and spaces for various purposes. Eventually, the system came to include 3.5 miles of tunnels and hidden corridors running from 8th to 18th Streets and from South Street to Walnut and Locust Streets. It's absorbed many shops, building entrances located above, and even a police station. This entire maze was created as part of the subway construction, not for pedestrians to take shelter from bad weather. The first subway line was built using the cut and cover method. Workers dug deep trenches from the surface to lay tunnels. This damaged buildings and temporarily rendered some streets inaccessible. To minimize the impact, additional tunnels were built to move materials and workers underground. These pathways later evolved into concourses. Over time, the underground labyrinth was used for various purposes. In 1977, the opening of the underground The Gallery Mall attracted shoppers. However, by 2012, many parts of the network were closed and fell into disrepair due to rising crime rates. In 2014, SEPTA leased the concourse system from the city for 30 years. In an attempt to revive these underground spaces, the company launched the City Centre Concourse Improvement Program. This multi-million-dollar plan was aimed at reviving empty and abandoned concourses through infrastructure modernization, interactive transit signs, new shop displays, and creative decor. And we're yet to see how these spaces will come to life. But no matter how abandoned the concourses under Philadelphia may look, if you go down to the subway's deepest levels, you'll find something that feels almost post-apocalyptic. Or if you prefer, like something from a parallel universe. Because in reality, Philadelphia's subway was supposed to be significantly larger than what residents know today. Here is a fantasy map of the subway that sparked a lively discussion on Reddit. But this isn't just a figment of someone's imagination, it's a deliberately designed scheme based on the Merritt-Taylor Plan, an ambitious blueprint for the city's transportation system. Its visionary was Abraham Merritt-Taylor, the first commissioner of the newly established Department of City Transit. Back in 1913, the creators of the plan envisioned the subway looking like this. Among others in just about all sections of Quaker City, the Taylor Plan suggested subways along Chestnut, Walnut, and Arch Streets. A subway loop to distribute riders on the Broad Street line around Center City, a line along Benjamin Franklin Parkway to points north, and a subway branch into Northeast Philly via Roosevelt Boulevard. The plan was taken very seriously despite its considerable challenges. Here is the original isometric diagram of the underground structures at 13th and Arch Streets. The plan envisioned the construction of the proposed line on Arch Street. Moreover, they actually began construction. A significant portion was built, but then something went wrong. In 1916, Taylor was replaced by a more pragmatic transit commissioner, William S. Twining, who didn't share many of Taylor's ideas. In addition, World War I had a major impact. There was a shortage of labor, construction costs skyrocketed, and materials were in short supply. The city also spent huge sums of money on several transportation projects. Legal issues with awarding contracts complicated matters even further. By the time clear decisions were finally made in the 1920s, the era of private cars had overtaken the era of subways and trolleybuses. Then the Great Depression hit, completely destroying any prospects of the subway lines under construction. So, what was the result? In 1915, sections of tunnels under Arch Street and Locust Street were excavated, but the construction ceased due to a lack of funds. The tunnel under Locust Street was eventually completed, but the tunnel under Arch Street was not, as World War I led to the abandonment of the Ring Road project. Before the war, only two short underground sections were dug under Arch Street. One between 12th and 13th Streets, 80 meters, 260 feet long, and another between 10th and 11th Street, 39 meters, 127 feet long. These large sections were likely intended to become stations on the line. There's a legend that the Trocadero Theatre, also known as the Troc, located at 1003 Arch Street, once had an emergency exit leading to one of these tunnel segments during its most notorious years. And the famous Chinese Friendship Gate on 10th Street could have stood exactly at the intersection of 10th and Arch. Instead, it's actually far from the intersection. This wasn't because the engineers made a significant error, but because the tunnel beneath Arch Street might not have been able to support the weight of the 12-metre, 40-foot structure. At the very least, it certainly would not have allowed for a proper foundation. The abandoned subway now looks like this. Two metal gates on the sidewalk of Arch Street are the only entrances to these abandoned tunnel sections. If there's anything even darker and less pleasant beneath Philadelphia, well, it's not hard to guess what it is. Naturally, we're talking about Philadelphia's sewer system, which reaches depths of up to 15 meters, 50 feet. One of the oldest and most fascinating in the US. Built in the early 19th century, it's grown into an extensive underground labyrinth. If all its pipes and tunnels were laid out in a straight line, they'd stretch across the entire country. Over 4,000 kilometers. That's approximately the distance from New York to Los Angeles. In its early years, the city suffered from poor sanitation, and waste was often dumped directly into the streets. When the city first introduced a water supply system in the early 1800s, the need for wastewater removal quickly became evident. By the 1830s, the construction of proper sewers was long overdue. The first tunnels for stormwater and sewerage were built by hand. They looked like arched structures built of bricks, as in many other cities. The bricks were laid with such precision that many of them have not needed repairs in nearly 200 years. Some sections are still functioning without major modifications. The old arched brick sewers can now be considered monuments of underground architecture. Some of them were originally intended as backup water reservoirs and went unused for quite some time. In fact, they were forgotten for many years until astonished engineers rediscovered them during sewer renovation in the 1960s. Today, Philadelphia's sewer system not only handles wastewater, but also helps control flooding. Special reservoirs absorb excess rainwater, helping to prevent floods in the city centre. This is especially important given that the system processes more than 1.7 billion litres, 450 million gallons of wastewater daily, enough to fill nearly 700 Olympic-sized swimming pools every single day. The main task for the sewers design was to minimise construction costs, so the sewers are often laid along natural riverbeds and streams. In these areas, engineers used the valley's terrain to ensure an optimal slope and avoid digging too deep, thereby saving money. However, it seems the city will have to shell out some more money in the future. This is because Philadelphia continues to experience occasional issues with its sewer system. To address the problem, the Wingo-Hocking Relief Sewer Tunnel project has been designed. It involves building a high-capacity tunnel at a depth of up to 30 meters, 100 feet. The only issue is that the project's budget is calculated in billions of dollars. But if this problem is resolved, underground Philadelphia will become twice as deep as it is now. The Windy City, the capital of the Midwest. Home to about 2.7 million people, it's the third largest city in the United States. Millions of tourists come here every year to see skyscrapers and attend the buzzing festivals. It has the second largest and oldest subway system in the country and some of the busiest railroad hubs. But what do we know about underground Chicago? There's a maze of tunnels, hidden passageways, and even secret rooms that once served as hideouts beneath its streets. And today we're going to delve into these mysterious underground layers and unravel what lies beneath Chicago. We are on the famous Lake Street, one of the main arterial roads of early Chicago. The city's first church, the first hotel, and the city tavern were built there. It was here on the corner of Market Street that one of the most significant events of the United States took place in 1860, when 10,000 people gathered in Wigwam Hall to nominate Abraham Lincoln for the presidency. But history is not only all around us, it's right under our feet. Wait, right under Lake Street? That's right, let's take a look. Like most of Chicago's busy roads, Lake Street has a composite pavement. It's like a layered cake. On top, there's 5 to 7 centimeters, 2 to 2.7 inches of asphalt. Among other things, it serves as a protective coating for the underlaying layer. It absorbs most of the impact from vehicles and weather conditions. Underneath is a 15 to 20 centimeter, 6 to 7.8 inches thick concrete base that ensures the strength and stability of the entire structure. Let's dip down just below the pavement to a depth of up to 30 centimeters, 12 inches. This is where the ground should start, but no, we see some old boards that look like parquet flooring fragments. Where do they come from? Straight from the 19th century. Long before Chicago existed, the whole area was carved with trails. Trails helped indigenous people and the first settlers evade swamps and flooded lands. Then Chicago was founded, its population grew, the city evolved, and the trails were used by countless farmers bringing their goods to the city. Naturally, during the rainy season, the old trails became a muddy mess. How did the people here cope with this? They built wooden alleys by putting wooden decks on top of the ground. In the 7 years from 1848 to 1855, almost $150,000 was spent on them. Today, that amount would equal to almost $5,500,000. At first, the idea seemed groundbreaking compared to dirt roads, which were falling apart quickly. The boardwalk seemed like a real relief. But then the problem began. The permanent humidity caused the wood to warp and rot. To prolong the life of the roads, drainage ditches were dug along the edges to drain the water and reduce the accumulation of dirt. But even with these measures, the wooden roads lasted only a couple of years. Soon, most of them became so inconvenient and dangerous that the authorities decided to build new roads right on top of them. Well, it's time for us to see what's further down there. Gas lines are typically buried between 30 and 61 centimeters, 12 to 24 inches deep. Telephone and internet cables are a little deeper, between 65 and 90 centimeters, 25 and 35 inches. These lines provide telephone and internet service to residential homes and offices. Though you won't see them as you stroll the streets of Chicago, you can rest assured that the damage to even one of these lines may entail far-reaching implications. If we look deeper at 90 to 122 centimeters, 36 to 48 inches, we will see major high-voltage power lines that feed city blocks. Deepest of all, 1.2 to 1.8 meters, 4 to 6 feet underground are water mains. This depth protects them from freezing in winter. However, utilities aren't the only thing we find here. A few centimeters below, about 2 meters, 6.5 feet, beneath the ground, we can see a true engineering wonder. We're under Lake Street at the foundation of the building. At first glance, it looks like a typical foundation, nothing special. But it's the real wonder, because it was finished after the building had been built. Hard to believe, and yet it's true. Imagine, it's the middle of the 19th century. At the time, the Chicago area was just above the level of neighboring Lake Michigan. There were virtually no drainage systems and the city streets literally stood in water. The problem was so acute that foundation reinforcement alone wouldn't have worked. So what did the Chicago engineers decide to do? They decided to lift entire buildings, and then they'd build new foundations underneath them. So in 1858, Chicago became the first city in the world where a brick 4-story building was raised by as much as 1.8 meters, 6 feet. It wasn't done with cranes or any other advanced technology, but with 200 jacks. And if you think that this is a unique case, you're wrong. In Chicago, the same technique was used to lift an entire residential block. This happened 2 years later, in 1860, and it took a bit more jacks, namely 6,000. But the most amazing fact is that life in the block never stopped for a moment during the entire process. Just imagine, buyers continue to shop, mailmen deliver the morning paper, while the entire block is being slowly lifted off the ground and practically hanging in the air. Raising buildings? Sure, that's cool. But do you know what's even cooler? Chicago is literally standing on trash. That's right, after the Great Fire of 1871, which destroyed a third of the city, more than 17,000 buildings, there was so much rubble left behind that the authorities simply gave up on it. Why remove it if we can reuse it instead? Mountains of bricks, wood, old walls, and even furniture were dumped right into the city centre. All of it was used to fill low-lying areas, reinforce the banks, and level the streets. In fact, new buildings were constructed directly on top of the debris. That means Chicago's modern skyscrapers are not only engineering marvels, but also direct descendants of the old taverns, shops, and houses that burnt down back in the 19th century. The engineers of the time reused nearly everything. For example, wooden roadways that fell into disrepair were repurposed as part of the city's new foundation. And do you know what is especially cool? The area that is now Grant Park used to be a massive landfill. It was covered with soil and turned into one of Chicago's most popular parks. And this wasn't the only case. The famous Michigan Avenue, the city's main artery, was elevated by several meters to avoid seasonal flooding. The lower layers of the streets like Lake Street and Wacker Drive still contain fragments of old Chicago, from charred bricks to pieces of demolished buildings. Today, this stands as a brilliant example of ingenuity. Chicago is literally built on the remnants of its past. It's not just a city, it's a symbol of how something great can rise from the ashes. As you walk down these streets, remember, something more than just layers of soil lies beneath your feet. You're stepping on pieces of history, burnt tavern walls, broken furniture, and maybe even someone's table that survived the fire of 1871. After discovering such an extraordinary event, it's time to reveal another, no less interesting mystery of underground Chicago. Let's continue our journey downward. Are we in some sort of basement? No, it's an underground bar beneath the earth at a depth of around 2.5 meters, 8 feet. In the 1920s, Chicago was saturated with a web of such places, with a particularly large number of them in the city's downtown area. These were Chicago's speakeasies, places where alcohol was sold on the sly, and all conversations were held in an ambience of hiding and secrecy. Why? The 1920s in America were the days of prohibition, when the sale of alcohol was strictly forbidden. But bans only fueled interest, and so there were places where people could buy alcoholic beverages illegally. And each such hideout had its unique, inexpressible vibe. Let's take a look at the Green Door Tavern on Orleans Street. This is one of the oldest buildings in Chicago, built in 1872 after the fire. The Green Door was originally a humble grocery store, but during Prohibition, its owners didn't want to miss their chance and turned it into an underground bar. Note the name of the spot. It's not just a random name. During Prohibition, if the door of the establishment was painted in green, it was a sign that it was a speakeasy. Want to see more? How about the Gold Star Bar on West Division Street, which has been around since the 1920s? This place is still rumoured to have ghosts, with many visitors claiming to have encountered unexplained phenomena in this old basement. Another famous speakeasy is Simon's Tavern in Chicago's Swedish neighbourhood of Andersonsville. Once you descend into this underground bar, you'll find yourself aboard the fancy liner Normandy. And remember, more than a century ago, a cruise on this ship was not accessible for most people. So the real hard workers, the blue-collar workers who gathered here after work, could feel themselves in a real beau monde. But let's face it, there was always danger lurking around every carefree party at the speakeasy. Police raids could happen at any moment. So what helped? Secret tunnels. Some Chicago speakeasies were part of a complex system of tunnels that helped escape the police. We'll talk about these tunnels later. And now, ready for the next stop of our underground journey? Then let's go to a depth of 3.5 meters, 11.5 feet. Welcome to the Chicago Pedway, a system of underground passages and tunnels located literally beneath the feet of Chicagoans. It was created in 1951 and addressed a crucial issue: protecting people from the unbearable Chicago weather. Yes, Chicago weather can be harsh. And while a blizzard blows or heavy rain pours down on the surface, you're walking through dry and warm hallways connecting subway stations, offices and stores. Not bad, right? It all started with a couple of tunnels between the stations of the red and blue lines. These were simply connecting hallways built for convenience. Over the years, however, the network has grown to encompass more than 40 blocks and 60 buildings, and its total length is now just over 8 kilometers, 5 miles. But Pedway doesn't have identical tunnels, as you might have imagined. Each section of the system is held by different owners. As a result, the design, lighting, and even temperature can change significantly as you walk through the tunnels. It's as if you were moving between different worlds. For example, the sections connecting the subway stations might look quite plain. However, in the hallway beneath Macy's, you will find stunning Victorian-style stained glass windows created in collaboration with the Stained Glass Museum. This is not just an underground passage, but it's a real art gallery. And that's not all. Pedway is a real city under the city. Here you can visit cafes, stroll through the stores, and go to the cinema, or even check out the fitness center's pool. As you wander through this maze, you can take a peek at the Chicago Cultural Center with its iconic Tiffany Dome, the largest in the world, or take the Golden Elevator to one of the art galleries. The Pedway itself can be considered the city's cultural heritage. Artists and designers exhibit their work here, hold pop-up performances, exhibitions, and installations. Graffiti thrives on the walls, while dead ends and little-used tunnel breaches turn into unique exhibition spaces. But not everything in the garden is rosy. With all the advantages of Pedway, its main problem remains: extreme complexity and lack of proper navigation. Do you want to spend hours looking for a way out? Then this is the place for you. The Pedway is notorious for being easy to get lost in. With over 200 entrances and exits, outdated signs, and no unified map, navigation is a real challenge, even for locals, let alone tourists. The problem was best summarized by the Chicago Tribune. Bring some magic to Chicago's Pedway, or at least some maps. And while the mayor's office deals with navigation in the Pedway hallways, we're moving on. And soon we'll be in pitch black darkness. Where are we? Wires on the ground? Some letters? Is it a subway? No, it's a special network of freight tunnels, 12 meters, 40 feet beneath the city. Back in the middle of the last century, these tunnels stretched 95 kilometers, 60 miles under the city, and were a critical part of Chicago's infrastructure. And it all started in 1899 when the Illinois Telephone and Telegraph Company received permission from the city to dig tunnels for telephone cables. At the time, no one imagined that the tunnel's purpose would soon change radically. Just a few years later, in 1903, Illinois Telephone got permission to use the tunnels for freight transportation. And so, the telephone company decided to retrofit the underground tunnels by adding railroad tracks for the transportation of cables and mail. That's when a real construction fever began under Chicago. Construction work was running around the clock, and on average about 3.2 kilometers, that's 2 miles of tunnels were built each year. A typical tunnel was oval-shaped, 2.3 meters, 7.5 feet high, and 1.8 meters, 6 feet wide, with thick concrete walls. Larger segments used for main lines were up to 4.3 meters, 14 feet high, and 3.9 meters, that's 13 feet wide. Can you see the dumps of blue clay? Small freight cars, originally pulled by mules, were used to remove it. The same cars were also ingeniously used for ventilation inside the tunnels. Their movement forced air to circulate through the system. In their peak years in the 1930s and 1940s, the tunnels were used to deliver coal, mail, and goods directly into the basements of the buildings so that the city could avoid additional traffic congestion. Cargoes were taken from the tunnels to the surface or to the basements of the buildings via special elevator shafts. There were a lot of funny stories about these shafts. The thing is that the construction workers laid the tunnels with little or no consultation with the city agencies. They simply dug whatever they thought they should, so that eventually underground passages could come to the surface in practically every second house. Residents joked at the time, any day now you might get a knock on your basement door with the news. Now you have freight service. Quite surprising, right? However, the tunnel boom gradually subsided. Underground freight cars eventually lost their competition for delivering goods to conventional trucks. The latter simply could carry more goods at a time, and the whole underground system began to lose its relevance. In 1959, freight transportation in the tunnels was permanently discontinued. The cars were scrapped, and the tunnels themselves began to be gradually forgotten. But in 1992, the tunnels under the city of Chicago came back into the spotlight. A regular workday, and then, suddenly, it all felt like the end of the world. It all started with a small mistake. Workers were repairing a bridge over the Chicago River. It seemed like nothing unusual, and then, bam! They breached the wall of an old freight tunnel. At first glance, it was nothing serious, just a crack with water trickling in. But beneath the city lays a long-abandoned tunnel network. These corridors had now become a trap ready to take in thousands of tons of water. And when that crack grew just a little bit bigger, the Chicago River simply came pouring in. How heavy was the flow? It was like turning a faucet on full, only this wasn't a faucet. It was a real powerful river. Once used for transporting coal, mail and goods, the tunnels had been abandoned long ago. Now they've become underwater channels. Water rapidly filled the underground corridor system. If it had been confined to the tunnels, maybe things would have been fine. But those tunnels connected the basements of hundreds of buildings. And soon everything below ground level started to flood. Offices, elevators, server rooms, practically the entire underground infrastructure of the city. Total damage, you might ask. $2 billion. And it wasn't a financial blow. For many, it felt like a real-life disaster movie. Picture this, you're sitting in an office working on your computer and suddenly hear about boxes floating in the basement. And a couple of minutes later, the water is knee-deep. The most amusing part of this story is the legend that local contractors supposedly tried to plug the hole with mattresses, only for the river to spit them back out while residents watched in amazement at the absurd efforts to save the city from flooding. There's no solid evidence for this episode, but the rumor of the mattress barricade remains one of the flood's enduring tales. It took weeks to recover. Water had to be pumped out of the tunnels, offices and basements. Electric lines, internet cables and communication systems all had to be replaced. The Chicago flood became a reminder. Even abandoned tunnels can someday return to make their presence known. This event stands in the city's history as a vivid example of how a small mistake can turn into a massive catastrophe. Yes, the forgotten tunnel network continues to remind people of itself, and sometimes in a very dramatic way. And it's not just the floods. Long before their heyday, tunnels were already a favorite hideout for Chicago mafia thugs. Let's go back to the late 1920s, the Prohibition era. At the time, Chicago was a real criminal hub. The gang of one of the most notorious criminals of the 20th century, Al Capone, was ruling there. Together with his henchmen, he used a network of tunnels under the city for his criminal operations, smuggling of alcohol and money raids. Tunnels helped members of the mafia not only suddenly appear in the right places, but also instantly escape from the police by hiding under the city. This was highly convenient. It is believed that at the time, the tunnels could connect mafia centers to key city buildings, including municipal institutions, courthouse, city hall, and even assembly hall. In 1998, a Chicago electrician accidentally drilled through a wall in a basement of a steakhouse and discovered a hidden room just above the bar. It was later discovered that the room had a secret exit to an underground tunnel system. But who would need this tricky escape route? This story took place in Harry Caray's Italian steakhouse. The house was once a haven for the mafia. In the 20s, one of Al Capone's gang members, Frank Nitti, lived in the same building. He settled in an apartment on the 4th floor with his wife, whose family owned the building. A great hideout, you'd agree. The windows overlooked the city courthouse, keeping Nitti abreast of all the current events. And this is not a unique case. In some restaurants and buildings, you can still spot secret doors leading to underground mazes. Today, however, most of these tunnels are closed and sealed, and it's against the law to enter them. Only workers and city service representatives can go down into them. So if you want to fully explore Chicago's underground, keep in mind that only officials or construction workers are allowed to access some places. Wait, what's that loud rumbling sound below us? Let's dive a little deeper. We are in the subway at Clark Lake Station, about 20 meters under the ground, deep beneath Lake Street where we started our journey. In front of you is a unique 3-level station, one of the biggest transport hubs in the city. It connects the surface level simultaneously to the Union Elevated Railroad line and the underground Milwaukee-Dearborn line. Welcome to the Chicago Loop. At the turn of the 20th century, Chicago's public transportation system started to develop at breakneck speed. In 1892, the first elevated railroad service opened, known as the Chicago L. However, until the 1940s, all metro lines either ran at street level or were elevated on trestles. That's right, the subway as we know it now simply didn't exist at the time. Things changed in 1943. That year, the first subway line, the State Street Subway, which is now part of the Red Line, opened. The underground section finally made it possible for residents of the South and West Side districts to get downtown faster. And Chicago didn't stop there. In 1951, the Dearborn Street Subway Blue Line was completed, running under the river and parallel to State Street. The aforementioned freight tunnels were used for construction. It made the process much easier and allowed to save on materials. Over time, the Chicago L became one of the most sophisticated subway systems in America. However, it also had its share of dramatic stories. In 2002, Joseph Konopka, better known as Dr. Chaos, used the old tunnels under the Blue Line subway for his sinister plans. He used the abandoned underground rooms as a hideout where he stored deadly chemicals, sodium cyanide and potassium cyanide. Konopka would force open doors and change locks so he could have free access to the tunnels. He involved teenagers in his work to help him get access to more and more subway rooms, telling them that what he was doing was urban research. In the end, Konopka was arrested and the hidden substances were seized before he could implement his plan. No one ever found out what exactly the plan was. And when asked by the judge why he'd gone on his vandalism, Konopka replied, "I've several reasons, but no real good reason." Yes, the underground tunnels beneath Chicago are full of stories and legends. But if you think we've already made it to the lowest level, think again. We're going even deeper. At a depth of about 25 meters, 82 feet, the underground section of the multi-level highway runs underneath Chicago. We're on Lower Wacker Drive, the lowest level of Chicago's traffic artery. This underground tunnel was completed in 1926 and instantly became one of the city's major roadways. Initially, Lower Wacker was designed to relieve the street on the surface. All delivery services, garbage disposal, and other utility needs of the city were diverted here. Soon the public became aware of it and began using it as a free parking area for cars and bicycles. Then homeless people settled on the dead ends of the offshoots of Lower Wacker. And then came the racers. They hold their races at night away from prying eyes. Though they may not be seen, they're perfectly heard. Races gather crowds of spectators, and the screeching of tires could be heard up to the top floors of city buildings. One video posted on social media shows cars whizzing around a ring of fire, completely stopping traffic on the entire Lower Wacker. Well, maybe they just want to replicate someone else's famous stunts. After all, the dark, winding tunnels of Lower Wacker Drive have repeatedly become the set for Hollywood movies. Here, Batman rushes on his legendary tumbler in The Dark Knight, chasing the Joker. And it's here where brothers Jake and Elwood swiftly escape from the police chase in The Blues Brothers. Yes, speeding down Lower Wacker is one hell of an adventure. But it's time to move on. We've almost reached our last stop. We go deeper and deeper until we're at the depth of around 90 meters, 295 feet. This underground infrastructure is something many people don't even know about. It's the system known as the Tunnel and Reservoir Plan, TARP, or simply deep tunnels. What tunnels again? Yes, but without them, Chicago wouldn't survive as a city. Billions of gallons of rainwater and sewage are collected here until they are treated and discharged. Remember the flooding problems Chicago has experienced since its founding? They started back in the 19th century and quickly became simply disastrous. Sewage was flowing directly into Lake Michigan, where the city's drinking water came from, and the flooding of the city led to disease epidemics. As a result, the city authorities implemented an idea unique in its scale. They turned the flow of Chicago River in the opposite direction, sending it toward the Mississippi River. But not even that helped. By the middle of the 20th century, it became clear that the problem had to be solved radically. So the idea of TARP was born, a colossal underground complex that would prevent flooding and protect the city from pollution. Gradually, starting in 1975, 4 huge tunnel systems were constructed. The tunnels themselves could reach a diameter of 10 meters, 33 feet. Construction took several decades. By 2006, the tunnels could hold almost 9 billion liters, 2.38 billion gallons of water. And the system has not only helped prevent new floods, it's also greatly improved the environment. Thanks to TARP, rivers and lakes near Chicago have become cleaner, and dozens of fish and amphibian species have returned to them. But the project isn't finished yet. By 2029, Chicago Mayor's Office plans to build additional reservoirs that will allow the system to hold up to 64 billion liters, 17 billion gallons of water. This will make it one of the most efficient wastewater control systems in the world.